Straight up. Well, tell me when you're ready. She's like, I still have all yours. Good evening. Welcome to the RSU5 Board of Directors meeting. It is Wednesday, March 13th, 2024. We are here at the Freeport High School. We have the full board with the exception of Carolyn. She let us know she wouldn't be joining us this evening, so we will get started with the Pledge of Allegiance. All right. So do I have a motion for consideration and approval of the minutes from the March 28th, 2024 meeting as presented, barring any errors or omissions? Thank you, Danielle and Beth. All those in favor? Great. None opposed. Adjustments?
None this evening.
Look at that. All right. So we will move on to number 6, good news and recognition. We have a report from our student rep, Phoebe.
All right. So lots of good things going on at the high school. On Friday, juniors and seniors went on a skiing, snowboarding, and snow tubing trip to Lost Valley, which was super fun from what I've heard. And today some students went to Pineland Farms in New Gloucester as a part of the FHS Career Exploration Program to learn about business, college, and career opportunities in farming, food science, and meat and dairy production. And the anatomy classes at Freeport have been doing their pig dissection unit. So I'm sure they've been enjoying that. And yes, so FHS hosted the One Act Festival this past weekend, and I think we got second place, which is awesome. So congratulations to everyone who was a part of that. Spring sports have been starting. I've been seeing like the schedules for all that's coming out, which is super exciting. The Scholastic Art Awards ceremony is this Saturday in Portland, and we have a bunch of Freeport High School students who won some of those awards, which is super exciting. And then today, student activists in Freeport went to the State House to participate in a gun safety conference. And the Best Buddies Club had its first meeting at FHS, which is a club that brings together students with and without intellectual and developmental disabilities. So we're super excited to bring this nationwide club to FHS, and some other schools in the district already have Best Buddies clubs, so we're super excited to join them. And FHS faculty and staff are participating in a suicide awareness and prevention workshop led by our JED mental health specialist this Friday during the PLD day. So super great stuff happening.
All right. Friday's a PLD day?
It is.
Okay.
For those of you, it is a
Duly noted.
Friday.
I really should pay more attention to that. I look at the calendar in, March, and then I don't look at it again until next year. All right. Thank you. That was a very thorough update. I learned something. I learned several things, but that one was very helpful to my scheduling. All right. So we will move on to number 7, public comments. Don't know if we have any public here okay. So then we will move on to number 8, report from the superintendent. And I think actually you don't have a report. We're moving right to Sean, right? All right. So we are happy to welcome Sean Shabbat, who is I always mess this up. What's your technical title? Yeah. Superintendent Director. I knew there was multiple pieces. Okay. Superintendent Director for the Region 10 Technical High School for a budget update. Welcome. You might want to flip the mic around. I don't think it's going to pick you up over there. Yeah.
Is that better?
He'll tell us. Oh, you have. Okay.
Put it up on the screen, as you can see, but it's also in the board members' packets. It is our outline of our budget for this upcoming fiscal year, and I would share with the committee that here are as you will see, the miscellaneous revenues from local and state. Our total proposed budget, and we'll go down through each line, basically interest, miscellaneous revenue, our state subsidy, and total estimated revenues is up close to 9%. The majority of that is an increase in state funding, in particular before our 2 new programs that we're starting this coming year, which is IT cybersecurity and our electrical program at Region 10. So the state has increased funding to help offset that. And then you'll see down below, I'll move this up a little bit. The additional cost assessment per school district is roughly about 3.18% increase. And for RSU5, that's $8,658. Then for the second part and the second page is, I think the board back in October, you took a tour of the facility and we talked about the main entrance and the bridge that leads into the main entrance of the school is in need of repair. And we applied for the school renovation revolving fund to help pay for that. We were awarded that grant, and the revolving fund, our application was for $643,000 for demolition and replacement of that entrance bridge, the steps leading up to it, and some work on the wall that faces that bridge that has some water damage. The good news about that is 44.9% of that will be forgiven by the state, and the remaining balance is a 10-year interest-free loan. So we have incorporated the breakdown of the cost of that portion of the bridge, and you'll see it's $8,992 that we're asking RSU5 to participate in that. So the total increase, if you go up, is 6.49%, or 17,650, where 8,992 of that is to pay back our portion of the loan for the demolition and the replacement of the bridge. The bridge, it's been determined by local officials, needs to be replaced. We can't continue to use it ongoing, unfortunately. And when you come to Region 10, you'll notice that there is staging underneath that to help support that. And that's just a short-term fix just to get us through. So having said that, we are, Sybil Brewer is our finance HR manager, who's here in attendance tonight for moral support for me, has done a lot of work for the budget and is currently working with the 8 municipalities because we need to have a region-wide vote. So when we have our June primary, we will also have something additional to that, which is a region-wide vote. So you'll, as you have in the past, encompass our budget and have a warrant article, our budget within your budget, but there will be a separate ballot referendum whether or not voters will support the additional costs of the replacement of the bridge. So there will be a region-wide, which is different, and some of the town or city clerks are having a hard time wrapping our heads around something new. It will be a region-wide, each municipality will vote in the affirmative or negative to support that bridge project. So there'll be a separate ballot issue, and our school committee board will be voting on that this Monday night. And then assuming that the board supports that, which they've indicated they will, we will be sending those warrants to every municipality. Then I'd like just to quickly share with you the cost drivers for our budget, and then I'll be happy to take any questions that you may have. The biggest increase in is salaries. You'll see teacher and nurse salaries is up close to 17%. 2 main reasons for that is the cost of the 2 new instructors for IT cybersecurity and our electrical program, but that was offset by additional state revenues. And if you recall, our teachers, our instructors are paid on a blended salary scale based on the collective bargaining agreements that you work out with your teachers and ed techs. So we take that blended scale, roughly about 25% of RSU5, and the remaining balance made up of Brunswick and MSAD 75. So when we negotiate at Region 10, we don't negotiate salaries. We take the blended average of the 3 sending school districts, and that's what our teachers make. And then some other highlights, ed tech salaries, we have a support staff contract, same thing. We take the blended average of the 3 sending school districts. Administrative salaries is up 2.7%. Non-contract salaries, where other administrators and support personnel, are up 4%. And custodial salaries, which are part of our support contract, is up around 5.3. And then the next below is health and dental benefits. We have an increase, but we've also estimated an 8%, like I mentioned, an 8% increase. And then we adjusted to budget for what we believe staff will actually take for insurance electives. This upcoming year will be our 3rd year with our JMG specialists, so we're picking up a portion of their salary. And then the unemployment paid, Maine Paid Family Leave Act, we are anticipating working with our associations and contributing up to 1% of that balance starting January 1st. And then we've had some increases in our technology and repairs. Our telephone system needs to be replaced, so we're budgeting for replacement of our telephone system. And then supplies, with the increase in inflation over the past couple of years, we've had to increase. As you know, building materials has gone up significantly, and so our metal fab welding and carpentry programs, getting supplies for those programs cost more than it has in the past. Other than that, I'm happy to take any questions that you may have. or defer them to Sybil.
Okay, thank you. Questions? I have a few.
Fire away.
Thank you for this. This is helpful. So I was curious about the increased subsidy. I mean, it's up 10% over the prior year because of those two new programs, right?
Yeah.
So is that sort of a one-time boost to get new programs started? Is that expected to be going for? I mean, I know we can never know, but what's
So the two reasons: the state has increased funding for CTE programs across the board, and it is a 2-year gear up when we start new programs.
okay?
In particular, not only for the help offset the instructor's salary, but to purchase equipment to help start that program.
Sure, that's what I was thinking, was to get you guys up and running on a new.
Yes, and
Yeah.
so we will not see those types of increases year over year, because after the first 2 years, they expect that you have purchased all that equipment.
Okay, but presumably some of the money in the budget this year were one-time purchases, because once you have them, you keep them. And yeah.
That's correct.
Okay, great. One other question I had around the bond, because this is new. We've never done one of these before. So each town will have a ballot, and the only question on it will be around the bond. Do you and your board have a plan for sort of communication around that, to make sure people understand that, we're leveraging almost half of it in forgivable, and this is obviously a safety issue? And
So we will talk about that next Monday night, and Candace and Colin will be there, and they'll be able to share out. But yes, we will have a plan, and we will have a public forum to allow the public to ask any questions, to educate them. And I anticipate us doing an op-ed in the local newspapers to help
okay.
inform the general public.
And I know sometimes in the ballot, they have like the description that talks about sort of the grant funds or the, matching funds that go with it, which I would consider this similar, right, with the forgivable piece of it.
So you're exactly right. On the ballot and on the warrant, it does do a brief project description of what we are doing and the costs associated, and how a portion of that loan, 44.9, will be forgiven by the state.
And the rest is interest free.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just on that, I think I have the language that we worked on that, so I can give the board a copy of what the language that we were working on.
You do.
It's just not in this.
Yeah. I mean, I would love for everyone to come to your public forum and hear all about it, but chances are most people will just learn about it that day when they show up in the voting booth. So the more information you can, include around why this is important, I think the better. Kelly.
Absolutely. And that's part of the reason why, well, two things. Legally, we need to have that public forum, but two, we know that a lot of people probably won't show up. So we want to put something in the newspaper to help inform.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a pretty essential project. Is there like kind of a worst case scenario, plan B, in case it doesn't pass?
You are right. It is an essential project for the operation of the building. If it doesn't pass, then realistically, those local officials will tell us we can no longer use that front entrance, and we will have to use our secondary back entrances and move multiple classrooms and all the administrative suite out of the current, because of fire code, it becomes a dead space or dead end, and it's too far to the nearest entrance. So we will have to do some major reconfiguring in order to make that take place. So it is essential for the operation of the school.
Okay. Other questions? Yeah.
Thanks so much for that presentation, Sean. And I've seen it before, because as you mentioned, I'm one of the reps with Candy to Region 10, and it's been great to be part of your process. I just wanted to, as a kind of additional piece of information, just share that something that Sybil created for the Region 10 board at the request of the Region 10 Finance Committee, of just the percentages of the total RSU 5 budget that our contribution to Region 10 indicates. So it was super helpful for Sybil to pull that together. So according to the last budget that Sybil was working with from us, the amount that we would be contributing to Region 10 would be 0.7% of Region 10's budget. And that is basically the same as what it was last year. And then the year before it was 0.5%. And that's the lowest of all of the percentages in relation to MSAD 75 and Brunswick. So that was just helpful to me. And I thought that might be helpful for this board, but also for the public to understand what that contribution really amounts to in terms of our overall budget.
Yeah, so it gives some context to your overall budget. Our request is, like Colin said, less than 0.7% of the overall budget.
And the assessment per sending district, that's based on sending kids, yes? Or
No, it's based on the cooperative agreement of the census in 2020. Every 10 years when the census comes out, and every 10 years we do the census. And then when that information comes out, we renew the cooperative agreement based on the census data of the 3 participating school districts. And that percentage is based on that census data.
so total population amongst the sending districts?
Correct.
So do we have the 2020 info yet?
Yes.
So that's already been done?
Yes.
Okay. I don't remember the last time we renewed it. So. Anything else?
Yeah, just to follow up on your question, Michelle, if the 8 municipalities do not pass the bond issue, then it will not be the first default is not that it then comes out of our pocket. It's basically it ends the project. Correct. So I think that's important for our public to know, and we'll obviously be talking about how we communicate that from the Region 10 board.
Public,
but I think that's important to understand that if this really good this really good loan does not get approved, then it's bad news bears for.
Yeah, I mean, there's not many opportunities to take out a loan and get nearly 45% forgiven, and then the remaining balance is 0% interest.
Yeah, those don't exist really, other than this. Yeah. So my other question is, obviously, there have been some projects at Region 10 over the years, sort of maintenance questions, deferred maintenance issues, the roof. Like you guys have done a good job of trying to get some of those things taken care of over time. Obviously, this is a big one. Is there anything else that you guys see as like, we're really worried about this in our capital planning? Like, do you have a capital plan on replacement, that kind of stuff?
When I got there, no, there was no capital plan. So we started working on one. And one thing I can share that we will be looking at to start, hopefully this passes, and so we can get this behind us over the next year, is repaving that parking lot and entranceway. It's showing significant wear and tear. And as we all know, life expectancy of roads and pavement in state with the frost takes a beating. So in the next 4 to 5 years, that parking lot entranceway will need to get repaved. That's the biggest thing. Before I came there a year and a half ago, they had just finished the HVAC system. And so that's working well. It's very energy efficient. So really the parking lot is the next biggest thing.
Thank you. Maura.
Thank you, Sean, for this information and for being here. When you said that 45% of the loan will be forgiven, does that mean that the 354 is the total cost of the project?
So the total cost of
like
the project is $643,000.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. That's what I was wondering. Thank you.
Anything else while we have Sean here? Thank you for coming.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. Happy to come back anytime.
Yeah. All right. So, review of the superintendent's proposed budget.
Okay, we're going to start with an update of some of the slides that we've seen before, just to ground us all in some of the work that we've done, and then we'll see some things that we have updated, and also we'll be talking about impact to the taxpayer. So here's our budget process timeline. Was actually moving pretty quickly, it feels like, for sure. And after tonight, just to remind everyone where we're at, next week there will be an opportunity for public input that the board will deliberate. The following week on the 27th, that's when there'll be more public input, and that's when the board will adopt the budget. And then we have 3 Q&A sessions scheduled on April 10th, the 24th, and then May 8th at Pownell, Durham, and then the high school from 6 to 6:30. On May 15th is our annual budget meeting, and that will be followed by the June 11th budget validation referendum. Looking at our enrollment, and we always put a pin in our enrollment on October 1st for budgeting purposes. And we had an increase of 10 students this year. And if you recall, one of our asks is going to be for a teacher at Mass Landing, because looking at our projections, 4th grade had 4 teachers, and it looks like we're going to need a 5th one there. 5th grade was looking up a little bit, but you'll see where we budgeted in a reserve account in the case we need that teacher. But there's our enrollment history. Our 10-year adopted budget history, just to remind everybody that there was the COVID shutdown that followed by a lot of money from the federal government through the CARES Act, and also through ARP. So when you look at some of those times where we had some of the 2% and even up to the 4.22, that's when the money started going away, certainly last year. And this year we're finding the money's going to be gone, all spent. And also we've had discussions about some of the things, for example, some of our tech equipment was all bought with that money, and it's all timing out in its age at the same time. To remind us all about our budget drivers and our priority areas. If you look at maintaining programming, one area is that there's a negotiated salary and benefits increases for our current staffing levels and no additional staff. That's the largest driver of our budget, is in personnel. And actually Sean spoke in his presentation. Again, I'll mention the main paid family leave benefits costs, and we did budget for that 1% because we're not sure what that share is going to be. We have a special education teacher at Mass Landing. Previously, that was grant funded through local entitlement. We still need that person, so it will be moved into the local budget. And a 0.5 FTE guidance counselor at DCS. Another one of our priorities is to maintain class sizes. And as I mentioned before, we've put in a grade 4 teacher at Mass Landing, and the high school has requested a 0.5 science teacher. Looking at what those increases of student support that are needed, we are requesting to adjust the assistant principal workdays at the middle school from 178.5 to 190, and that would be comparable with our assistant principal at Moore Street School. We're requesting an assistant principal at Mass Landing School for the 191 workdays. There's some stipend adjustments, and we've requested a new stipend to fund for our standardized testing coordinator at the high school. As we look to support the infrastructure and provide a safe learning environment for staff and students, we are requesting that we adjust the district computer tech open position to a network system administrator, and that's a position that computer tech's not filled right now. It hasn't been filled, it's open, and we're requesting a network system administrator because there's a need for someone with that level of expertise to support the district. The technology device and equipment replacements, as we mentioned, the COVID monies are going away and everything is timing out at the same time. So we're going to need to do some substantial replacements. We've upped our capital project funding. There are safety and security upgrades that we'd like to do, and we'd also like to replace a bus. Unknowns at this time, there were 2 last time. Region 10 was one of them. Now we know Region 10. So now, as you know, the board is still in negotiations for our educator contract. So that's still an unknown at this time. So there's an estimate for that. This next slide, if you'll notice, it says 2724. That was our initial request of 6.5%. But we have made an adjustment to Region 10. It is actually $9,550 less than we had budgeted for. So when you go to the next slide, I'll explain this. There's some blue areas. So if you look in the blue area on Article 3, Career Tech, that's where that's the decrease for the lower request. You notice Article 1 is up by $250 from last time. And Article 5 is down by $250 from last time. And as we've been carefully analyzing all of where all the budget requests were, we realized that actually one of there was stipend really needed to go in Article 1 and not in Article 5. So it evens out the same dollar amount. It's just moved so it's in the right article. So the new request is from 6.5 to 6.48% increase in expenditures from last year. And a history, sort of where we were at, to remind everyone, our initial request when we looked at all our salary benefits and rollover, that's basically existing staff moving to next year, plus all the initial requests from all the principals, all the department heads. The budget was a 10.35% increase. I worked with my team and we were able to get it down to 6.5. That's what we presented to the board on February 7th. And tonight, March 13th, we are at 6.48% currently. When we get to looking at the budget impact sheets, and if you want to see a full view, we weren't able to put everything on the slide at once. It's actually on page 10 and 11 in your handbook that you have. It was easier. Some people like to look on everything at once as we go through this. And I'll walk us through this. At the top, when you look at that middle line is what we're proposing this year. The first lines are what we were assessed last year. And so our total operating budget for 24-25 with adult ed is $41,612,460. And you see the difference. You see that's the 6.48% that you just saw in those articulated articles. When we're looking at the shared revenue side, that's really, if you're on page 10, if you pop down to the bottom, those are there's a list of the things that we have for shared revenues. For example, the Hunter Road field maintenance, that's a contract we have with the town to maintain the fields. That price you're going to see is what the contract actually is. The shared employee, that's a maintenance worker that we share with the town. State agency client with Medicaid, you'll see that is down by $15,000, and that was based on we're looking at what's coming in this year, and it's less. Interest, we feel that we can increase that significantly based on what we're seeing right now for rates and what's coming in. To the RSU5 from Laugh and Learn, in that budget, they're going to contribute $10,000 to the RSU. CDS, we're receiving, we're looking at what we're taking in through CDS through billables, and we're actually anticipating more. So we upped that by $29,000. In our aspirations account, it's basically a budgeted line money have, so it's an in and out there. You'll see it on the expenditure side, same amount you'll see here, because that's money we have in the bank. And then from our undesignated fund balance, we're recommending we put $900,000 in from your undesignated fund balance towards the budget for next year. So that's what that line is on that slide. Let's see. And then we'll pop back here a little bit. When you look at, so that's the shared revenue. That's where that number comes through. We also get, because we're part of a service center, We get additional monies for that, and that's $58,909.80 for next year. Looking at our state aid by allocation by town, that's right from the ED 279. And I know the board's done a lot of work looking through that, what that really means. So those numbers for each town, those are exactly from the 279. And you can see where our total subsidy is on line B. And then we move on to non-shared debt. We know we're still, where Durham still has a little bit of non-shared debt that they have, and it's gone down a little bit. That's because interest is a little bit less every year. So we're down to 121, 247.63. And that's the only town that has it. So the required local that you see, that number comes again from the 279. So in order, as we remind us all, in order to get that state subsidy, and the nice thing is state subsidy is up by 113,000 and some change. But in order to get that, the towns have to raise the amount that you see on line D. And you'll notice that that's up by $519,522 total. So that's where that comes. So in order to get subsidy, the towns have to raise that amount. But we also know there are some additional local monies that are required, and that's through all of your cost sharing that we have. So that's where you'll see the additional local monies, the ALM, per the cost sharing plan that we have with the towns. That's where that dollar figure comes from. Okay, and then we get on to... Okay, so I think we can move. All right. The next slide, you have that there's the local monies. We've done shared revenues already. We've gone through that. So now we'll get down to the next three slides, and that's on this is all on page 11 if you want to see all the towns together. This is where we pull it all together, where you're looking at the 279, you're looking what the state mill rate is, required local from remember how it carries over from the other page, the additional local monies required through the ALM. And then Durham's the only one that has that non-shared debt. Remember, you won't see that in the other towns. And you look based on all of this, what the impact would be to the taxpayer based on the 2023-2024 mill and the taxable valuation. So it's based on last year's valuation. So that's where that comes. So you will see over on the side what the impact based on that knowing that valuations can go up, what it would be for each town. For the town of Durham, it would be at 6.7, for Freeport 4.61, and for Pownell 6.11%. Okay, so let's move on. Let's talk a little bit about unallocated fund balance. I know there was a question. I think, Colin, you had a question for us at one of the meetings about how much can you have? What do we have? And so this is the statute that we put on the slide. And it had been 5%, but it popped up to 9%. And that's good until 24-25. And then it will change. So if you turn to the next one, how much do we actually have in a bank? The 2022-2023, you see the first line is the operating budget, which is $37,223,151. 9% of that, you go down to the next line, is $3,350,084. Now, we caution this is unaudited 2022-2023 because the audit's not completed, right? We're still in process. So unaudited, we're anticipating it would be $5,611,531. That's what we believe it will be. But again, it's unaudited. That's not a totally firm number. Out of that, for the current year's budget, we use $900,000. And then, if you remember, we had our reserve accounts for the tennis courts, for the track, that $75,000 that we allocated this year. So that came out of undesignated. So our estimated ending balance would be $4,636,531. And then we estimate 9% of that operating budget, which you see from back to 2022, 2023, you go back up there. There's where you see the $3,350,084. So amount of excess, if you go to the 9%, would be $1,286,447. Now, our budget request is we're proposing to use $900,000 to offset taxation. And then if you remember, we'll talk about in a little bit the reserve accounts that we want to establish that for $937,000 total. So the projected undesignated fund balance usage would be $1,837,000. And that's not, again, we also not take into account after this year, is there money that's left over after this year? So that's that in a nutshell. To chat about our reserve accounts, to remind the board what we're recommending. And again, the reason we want to establish some of these accounts, we want to establish non-lapsing article reserve accounts, which will allow us to maintain a contingency outside of local taxation that will allow our district to react to enrollment-driven needs that arise throughout the fiscal year. And we'll be utilizing undesignated fund balance to fund those accounts. That's money, basically money in the bank to fund that without impacting the taxpayer. The accounts we'd like to establish is in Article 1, that's our regular instruction reserve account. Our anticipation, as I mentioned earlier, we're watching grade 5 at Mass Landing, so we'd like to put $95,000 in for that use. In a multilingual teacher, we have 3 in the current local budget that will cover students we have right now, but if we have another influx of students over the summer with multilingual needs, we would need to have an additional teacher to meet those needs. So if that was the case, that's how we would utilize those funds. I'll also remind the board that if we were to add any of those positions, you have to make a vote to add those positions. So it would not be something that we would do without board notification and board authority to do so. It's just board. So once it's in a reserve account, and we'll also have we'll have the taxpayers authorize us to create it and authorize it to expend it. So then it's there, we can spend it, and you would just authorize us that we could do that. Article 2, the special education instruction reserve fund. This changed slightly from last time. We had put in $300,000 on our first presentation with the anticipated use of 6 additional special education technicians and also for unanticipated out-of-district placements. We've been watching what we see for children who are coming in from CDS into Moore Street School in grade K, and that we want to be able to meet their needs. We're still going through some of our CDS transition meetings that will be coming up soon. But based on what we know right now, we're anticipating we might need to have additional staffing for a specialized program. So that's why we would put it in the contingency until we absolutely know that. And the tricky part with this is that those transition meetings don't happen usually until the end of April, beginning of May. So we want to make sure this is in here in case it's needed. Moving on to the next slide. Article 6, that system admin, we're recommending putting $37,000 in that because we'd like to begin in the strategic planning process, and we'd like to be able to hire a consultant to support that work. And then Article 8, transportation reserve fund, $60,000. Again, we need to make sure if we have a lot of children that unanticipated that have arrived in the district, some of our new Mainers, we want to be able to provide transportation for those children. We already have a heating reserve fund. It has $100,000 in it. We're not anticipating that we'll have to use it next year. And we did put $292,900 in the local budget, in the operating budget for our heating needs next year. The capital reserve fund, currently we have the balance of July 1, we believe will be $500,175. We'd like to put in an additional 125,000. If you recall, we're hoping to use that towards some matching grants through the Community Oriented Policing Service School Security Grant, and that grant could fund up to $500,000, but you have to provide a match. So we're hoping to be able to tap into those. And at our last check, the grant application has not been available. I know that Sam is watching it regularly for us, and he's on top of that. We've of that capital reserve fund, we're estimating panel septic replacement, $450,000. And we did share at the facilities meeting that we were hoping we could start the project at the end of the school year, perhaps in June, to get some of it done out of this year's budget, do the rest next year. But just working with our design engineer and the timing of it, we won't be able to start the project until next fiscal year. So we have that in there for that use. Okay. So on to tennis court reserve. Balance will be $110,000, and we'd like to put another 40 in there to get us up to 150. And again, your track reserve fund, we have $210,000. Contribute another 35 to get it up to 245,000. All in all, if you put all those reserve accounts together, it's $937,000. And that, along with what we're putting towards the budget for the taxpayers, would also lower our undesignated fund balance more to right where it should be. And it's just important as we look at all these requests that we ground ourselves back to why we're here. That our the goal of our district, our mission is to inspire and support every learner by challenging their minds, building character, sparking creativity, and nurturing passions. And our vision is that all our kids graduate as compassionate, honest, respectful citizens who learn and contribute to their communities for life. And we believe this budget will help us continue to do that. And I will take questions. Maybe what I'll do, since the PowerPoint's done, is I'll come back there to answer questions, and then I might, if there's specific questions about, if there's a specific question we'd like to ask one of our principals or our directors about a specific ask, that they could come to the podium, if that's okay.
Free up that mic. We're going to need it. Thank you for the update. Okay. So we have now gone through kind of the initial presentation to the board of all the different schools, all the different departments with their requests. And now we have sort of the full picture of both the expense side as well as the revenue side, right? And what the impact is for the towns, estimated impact, because we don't have the April 1, 2024 valuations yet, of course, because it's in the future. So for those who weren't clear why. So now this is our opportunity to ask clarifying questions. This is kind of the board's opportunity. We have a pretty fair chunk of time on the agenda tonight. We have another deliberation at our next meeting next week, and then assuming no major changes, the expectation is we would adopt the budget at that last meeting in March. Yes? Yeah. So kind of 3 deliberation periods, but that last one, usually we kind of want to come into that meeting having a good handle on what the number is, because otherwise it makes Kelly's life super fun to change things on the fly. So, usually if the board is looking for changes from the recommended budgets up or down, we want to try and flesh those out tonight and next week. And historically we have utilized these several meetings, but the time between them, if we would like the superintendent to go back and gather more information on something, or try and find a different way to do something, or something like that. So that is that's something we can talk about tonight and see where the pleasure of the board is as it relates to the budget as a whole and specific things within the budget. I think there were some specific questions folks had on kind of items. So we'll start with those, and then we can move on to a more kind of higher level conversation of the budget as a whole. Questions? I know you have one. Danielle? Might as well start moving up here now, Will.
Yeah, sorry, Will, but I do have a question for you. I hate to admit, but I'm so a little confused about the health teacher and the halftime guidance. I know that the wellness teacher, I know that's, I saw it on the website that we're asking for that teacher, but I'm still confused about the reduction, the half a guidance, but then we still want half a guidance.
Yes.
This is one of those ones you're supposed to have your chart,
Sorry.
your like whiteboard.
No, I should have
half a
brought something
person.
along. So I will try to explain it again. I'm sorry I've made it so confusing, but please don't hesitate to keep pushing until it actually makes sense. Okay. Because already I'm thinking, okay, what I'm about to say is going to be confusing anyway. The reason there was a reduction in half a guidance and then an addition in half a guidance is just because of where the funding was in this current year compared to where it will be for next year. And the guidance salaries is in a different place from where the wellness teacher piece is. So we had attempted, I'll back up one place. We had a half a guidance position for the last 3 years prior to this year. And just from a historical perspective, that came in, we came to the board in 2021, and just looking at our school across the district, the ratio of guidance support to students. And at our school at that time, we had 438 students and 1 counselor. So a ratio of 438 to 1. At the other schools, it was much closer to 300 or 200 to 1. And at our school, one of the demands on the counselor is not only are we working with children incoming and starting their educational journeys in pre-K and K, but we're also transitioning 8th graders into high school and making their course selections and things like that. So there's quite a pull. And so we had come at that point to add a half a guidance position, which then was added in. For this current school year, I came to the board last spring and had, we knew we had this need to add around wellness, and really making sure that we sort of had health curriculum specifically for grades 5 through 8, which was an area lacking for our school compared to some other schools. And what we attempted to do was to merge, to keep the budget as least impact to the budget as possible. We attempted to add a half-time position to the existing half-time guidance we had, and we would have had a counselor, in essence, working in this role, well, a wellness teacher working in this role, which would be supporting the guidance counselor and addressing the health need. So for this current school year compared to last year, we added a half-time into that guidance and made it full-time. Unfortunately, we had hired a couple of people into this role, and the outcome of it was that for most counselors, they did not actually want to have that kind of teaching responsibility also. And so we were unable to maintain that position. So we still had that full-time funding for a counselor. Does that make sense so far? I know it's starting to get a bit gray, but you may recall I came back to you this year in the fall and explained that we had sort of struck out now twice with the counselors that we had hired, but we still had this need to address. And as such, we shifted that to hire a 1-year only phys ed teacher and we shifted our current phys ed teacher, Mr. Lyons, in to address that wellness component. So then as we start to look towards this year, we've been wrestling with this position and trying to determine, all right, what do we need to do? Because we have to have this additional guidance for the same reasons I came to you in 2021. And in fact, since then, in the last 4 years, the school has grown another 10%. So we've gone from 438 to 483. So that ratio is just greater. So we have to get that half-time role back. But what we also determined this year is with that growth in student population, where we used to have grade levels of 2 or 3 classes, we are now to a place where, with the exception of one grade, our current 7th grade, every one of our grades is now 3 sections. There's 3 classes in every grade. When we have specials classes, it meant that we have had to merge classes together to take 6 sections because, for example, our 3rd and 4th graders have specials at the same time. Our 1st and 2nd graders have specials at the same time. We have to have 6 sections of specials to accommodate the 6 classes. And we've always had 5, which we've tried to like push together. In doing that work this year with this phys ed, the extra phys ed role we added, it allowed us to have 6 sections of specials, which meant we weren't merging classes. And there's sort of a slight irony to referring to specials as specials, because for the children, they're great enrichment activities, and for a lot of children, it's a great part for them because it appeals to their interests. For others, it can be quite a challenging part of the day. They can feel a little more intimidated about performance type work, where in art or in music or in phys ed, sometimes your strengths are demonstrated to others, and sometimes your insecurities are highlighted for others. The teachers work really hard to not make that a part of it, but for a lot of children, it can also be a stressful part of the day. Shifting them then into a group with other children they're not working with has become a challenge. We found it's impacting kids. So this spring, or this winter, I beg your pardon, as we then looked at, okay, how do we solve this conundrum of needing guidance, of needing health, but also now with population growth, addressing this 6th person in specials? The solution we came to was to take, in essence, this full-time role we're currently using in phys ed and make that a wellness teacher. In order to do that, the impact to the budget is an additional half-time person. And then it became a question of like, well, where is that half-time person? Is it taking half away from guidance and adding half to wellness? It's sort of like almost like moving the shape around. But the impact to the budget is an additional half-time person. From this current year, where we were going to have a full-time guidance person, to next year, where we'll have a full-time wellness person, but want to get back to also that half-time guidance. So we have 1.5 counselors to impact that ratio. As we worked through it, the determination was, which may be faulty logic, given that I'm explaining this for the 3rd time, was that we thought it would be cleaner. I know, hindsight, right? To do it in this way. It also allowed us, bless you, it allowed us to post for that wellness role, because we already have that money in the budget. And it's such a hard role to fill that we wanted to be able to post that in March and not in mid-June. So we already had that money in this category because you'd moved it into this area for us to have this 1-year only phys ed. So in essence, we're leaving that money where it is, and we're back to coming in to say, in order to do that, we need to add half a counselor. The reason it shows we're taking away half a counselor was because last year there was a full-time counselor. It's one of those math questions which your son would nail for us, but the conundrum where you were asked to calculate the train leaving Chicago at 700 miles an hour at 3 a.m., what time will it get to Cleveland? And you're like, when will I ever need that? It's like, when Will Pidden comes asking for a budget request. Yeah. So Does that make it any more logical?
It does. So it's really a part-time person, which then brings my next question for really you and Jen Gulgo is that I always feel like hiring someone part-time is harder than hiring full-time. I look at that from what, my line of work. Nobody really wants to work part-time. They want the benefits and that kind of stuff. So is that something that's going to be harder to fill than per se a full-time position? Or do you have someone in mind?
No, I don't have someone in mind, and you're correct that potentially you are limiting yourself by making it half-time. There are people out there for whom that is exactly what they want. Oftentimes people who, like the person who was in our half-time role previously, it was great timing. They would return to work from starting a family, and that kind of phasing can work well. And it can sometimes be on the opposite end of that. There's people who have other demands that they're trying to balance but want to keep working. So it definitely does limit. It doesn't necessarily eliminate. But I think fiscally, it's, could we accommodate a full-time counselor? Absolutely. I mean, that's still 240 to 1 ratio. But we are also aware that last year we added a half-time social worker who's been a great resource. And, we'd love to have full-time of everything. So, I think your point is well made, and in essence is evidenced by the conversation we're having, which is we've tried to merge things, and sometimes by trying to be fiscally responsible, we end up creating a conundrum where we can't actually then solve the problem we tried to solve, which is kind of what happened to us this year. But equally, I think all of us take it our responsibility to try and add to meet the need as it is, because you already heard there's competing demands and there's a lot of things we removed, and so that's kind of why we approach it like that. Yeah.
So there's 3 people now that work there, and next year there'll be 3.5.
Where?
In your building?
We got more than 3. I just want to tell you. Spoiler alert. Closer to 100.
Yeah. Yeah. So right now whatever we called them, there are 3 people doing the work of wellness, PE, and guidance right now.
Yes, but I wouldn't put them in the same category. So, but yes, if you want to think about,
I'm talking bodies.
If you want to talk in those roles, which are in the same kind of
I
category,
different articles, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But currently, let's talk about bodies. We have 3 people, and we would have 3.5.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. No, we take the left side of the brain. That's what we want, down the middle. Okay. All right, that helps. I mean, it's an interesting question, right? Because if you say most of them are 200 to 300, and if we had 2 full-time, we're at 240 a piece. I mean, that's a reasonable ask. But I also understand with the competing demands, I worry. I have the same worry that Danielle does, that you're going to limit yourself in finding the right person. And so I don't know what the solution to that is, other than maybe your new reserve accounts. You never know. Maybe.
Believe me, I'm happy to hire a full-time person, but everyone's trying to be responsible about it all.
Yeah.
So, and I think you're right. I mean, clearly, there's more people looking for full-time work than for half-time work.
Yeah.
And not least of which, as you mentioned, Danielle, benefits. But there are people out there, and hopefully we'll find a good person.
Did anybody else have questions for Will while we have him up there? Oh. Apparently not going anywhere for a while.
That's
We're
right.
going to start with Maura because I looked at you first.
Yeah, please don't use the word clarify. That's all.
Well, could you I wanted to know for the whole district, but could you tell us how many open positions, if any, you have at your school right now?
Currently?
Yeah.
We have 1 special education ed tech position.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm speaking on behalf of Jeremy for Durham, we currently have 3 bus driver positions, well, really orange, purple, red, and the 7th. So really, it'd be 4 bus driver positions that Jeremy works miracles every day to have the buses running.
Okay, thank you.
Just really want to talk about the train leaving
Oh, yeah.
Chicago.
Yeah,
I've
yeah.
it went real
Yeah.
super
4:15 p.m.
fast.
is the answer, just so you know.
Get the space camp group on that, see if that's possible. I have 2 questions. One is, I guess, for anyone who wants to answer this, including yourself. I guess, do we have any anecdotal data on like how difficult it is to find part-time people versus full-time people in terms of just our capacity, like this year or like the last couple of years, to like, in other words, have we had a harder time filling half-time positions than we've had filling full-time positions? Do we? And I know I'm asking for anecdote and not maybe a little more qualitative than quantitative, but
Okay.
I'll take that one for the district. And I think it depends on the position. And I know that we have with some halftime teaching positions, we fill the other half of the day as those folks work for us as ed techs. So where we can in any halftime position, we try to keep people employed full time. So we've done that, and that has worked for us.
Yeah, purely anecdotal. We have a half-time social worker who we were just super fortunate to get because it was someone who does an outstanding job but wasn't looking for full-time. And then we've had full-time people for whom it hasn't worked out. So, but generally the number of applicants would differ. I would say to you that purely, again, anecdotally, one of the things that does complicate it is often people who start as half-time, then after that need that had them working half-time has changed, they then want to go full-time. And that's when it can sometimes be tricky to keep them into a full-time role at the level they want to be. So, you know, you over the last 5 years, we've had some half-time RTI roles that you've all seen grow into full-time roles, partly because of the demand and, well, always because of the demand for students, but in a number of cases, people who were in those half-time roles have then continued into a full-time role. So it often is a temporary thing, I think, the half-time part. So I know I'm not supposed to be here asking questions, but it makes me ponder that in that kind of thinking is like, what is the longevity of people in half-time roles in the district? That might be an interesting thing to look at also. If there was a pattern there that in fact they tended to be kind of like 4-year type positions that then they're looking to either move elsewhere or move into full-time, that would be interesting to sort of be aware of too.
I think in this scenario, though, I think we have the case that a full-time would be warranted today, if not for, money. So the thought of stepping the process of like finding a good person, getting them in at a halftime, at the impact of a halftime person to start, and eventually growing it into a full-time for this one, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it doesn't always make sense, right? But I think for this one, probably makes a lot of sense in terms of the needs to be met. So yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if you were standing up there 1 year from now going, we're adding that half back. Well,
I might be standing up here before that if we're like, all right, this is where we're at. We're going to test out this new theory on the contingency fund. But it's, I would assume you're right. And the pattern too has just been we continue to grow. And that is definitely what makes it equally demanding, right? So.
Did you have one more before I give it back?
I mean, I guess my second question is really like, is it worth the risk to go after a halftime person? I mean, given what you said, but in terms of the potential impact on the kids, in other words, us not finding that 0.5 person, like what's the impact on the kids there if like we don't find that role? Because we're kind of again, for good reasons, we're
Mhm.
trying to kind of like
Mhm.
play whatever we're playing budget games. um,
I can tell you this year, it has been a heavy lift to be with just one person. And so our councillor, Ms. Trigiani, is definitely pulled in multiple directions, and others have stepped in to try and carry those loads. So aspects that the councillor would usually do, our assistant principal has picked up, our social worker has picked up. So one is definitely not enough. So we definitely can't go back to just only having one next year. We've learned that 4 years ago, and it's as true today as it was. So I think the impact, as I'm thinking through it right here in the moment, Colin, would be less about not having someone and more about saying, if we're unable to find someone in what is sort of like the prime hiring window of the springtime, it may be that we are coming back to Jean and the board in the summer and saying, we've got to make this shift now, because we've got to see if we can get someone. Now, obviously so the impact there is more likely on quality of candidate, because, this is the time of year where that happens. But, and, this is kind of, I hate to say it, but we had to weigh this up between, do we emphasize waiting for a wellness candidate to be the later hire, or the counselor to be the later hire? Because one of them is new money. So we were bound one way or the other. And so we decided, okay, this wellness role is also critical, very hard to fill. So we'd rather have more of a runway with that role. And it meant that we had to have the counselor role, whether it's full or half-time, be a little bit later. And at some point, usually in the spring, we're able to then post these as anticipated, and they don't obviously get filled if the budget doesn't pass. So it's not necessarily that it doesn't get posted till June, but it certainly doesn't get closed out until after the money's actually approved.
So my thought around that reserve, I'm thinking what you were just saying about being in different articles. Do we have an article that would cover that, to go from a half to a full? No.
We do not, because there's not a reserve account in that article, but we certainly can come back to the board and look at potentially what we would do to make that reserve. We can bring that next time.
Thanks. Beth.
No, it's probably good because mine is a sort of different subject. I was just, when I was looking at the increase and reduction summary, I didn't really remember a conversation about the special education teacher at DCS that is not in the budget. And I'm just wondering if you could kind of talk about what that need is and how you're kind of going to make it work if it's not needed right this
Yeah,
second.
certainly. Again, that was one that it's, we're trying to, and you've heard this over multiple years, and Jean also, with Kelly, really sort of led this work of, at the end of the day, there's some things will out prioritize others, even though they're all, important. So one of the challenges we have, I don't want to sound like it's solely a challenge, it's also one of the great benefits we have, is that we have 10 grade spans, and 10 grade levels, I beg your pardon, in our span. And so our special education teachers work across multiple grade spans, which can then sort of spread their time or pull their time in a way that's hard to meet all the needs. So with one person working across, say, the 3-5 range, some of our third grade students who may have specific specially designed instruction and special education, it's not like we can then have them with a fifth grader, not because of socially or behaviorally, but just because their specially designed instruction is at such a different place. And so each of our instructional special ed teachers works, they sort of blend over where the need is, but for the broad brush, it's sort of 3 grade spans, sort of K2, 3, 5, 6, 8, And then there's definitely overlap, especially between second and third and sort of fifth and sixth. Over the last, I guess, 5 years, again, as the school's grown and also the impacts of other aspects of society and just the way things have rolled, there's an increased number of functional goals in IEPs, which are really around sort of behavior goals, if you like. And so for the case managers, the special education teachers, to be able to give specially designed instruction to meet functional goals as well as academic goals, that has spread that demand even more. So what we had been looking at and looking for was to bring in an additional, a fourth special ed teacher. At our school, the caseloads are pretty high, to then be able to take on some of that burden so that teachers were able to more readily meet the actual kind of specific time demands of IEPs. Because it's a tricky one. And for those who are not familiar with it, within an IEP, it's really quite specific about legally what we need to provide. And so we have to get increasingly creative with that sort of staffing demand to meet those needs. And so that is what that fourth position would be, fulfilling.
So currently you have 3 special education teachers?
We have 4 special education teachers, one of whom is the lead teacher for the Choices program, which is sort of a district position. So she or that role is not able to that's tied up. And then we have 3 special education teachers across providing specially designed instruction across the 9 grade levels. Our early intervention team, which I think we have said before, but I'm not sure we can say enough, just what a worthwhile investment that has been. I know that was another one we had to kind of like clarify because it was so new a couple of years ago, but it has been so impactful. And I'm sure you see in the news all the time the issues across the state around child development services not being able to meet children's IEP needs. The team we have is phenomenal. The 3 staff members do an incredible job. And that has been really impactful for supporting pre-K. And just sort of like that foundational year for them and their transition in. So that was I know it's a big ask, but it's been a great investment. So for us, it would be across those 9 grade levels of the 3 teachers.
And the reason that it's kind of in the level 3 rating is just because you're able to make it work, but it's really tough at this moment. And so you're hoping maybe next year it's a possibility.
Yes.
Is that what you're thinking?
Yes, it's been one of those requests that's been sort of like hovering for a little while. And I think you heard there was some other financial demands, having to shift support staff that had been in parts of the budget into the budget. And so again, it just sort of impacts how do we make this transition. But that particular role is actually right up there with the other half a guidance counselor. I mean, they're both sort of impactful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anything else for Will?
I don't know if it's for Will, but the 6 ed techs that were special education that were previously grant funded, where are those? Which schools are those in?
Some of them are not filled and they're scattered about. And they were actually, the funding was from local entitlement carryover money. So some of that, we have some that are filled, some that are not, but are needed that we're still looking for. And that is local entitlement carryover money. That's a one-time use and it's gone. So we want to put that in there to make sure that if we have that need, that we have that funding there for those folks.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Other questions?
I guess I have a kind of question off of Maura's. So there was an ask for 6, but when I looked, there's 4 current openings. So is that 6 into addition of the 4 already listed?
It's actually two additional, and some of our techs are funded through local, some are funded through local entitlement carryover, some are funded through local entitlement that we get every year. So this would be, just making sure that that money's there for those folks, including if the openings, we still need them, we just can't fill.
And that's one of the reasons those were put into the reserve as opposed to into the budget, right? So if we don't have someone to fill them, we won't use it and it'll stay in the reserve.
For the benefit of everybody who may not know, could you explain the difference between when it's local entitlement and when it's moved places in the budget to when this move's made, what that means?
Yes. So local entitlement, those are federal dollars that we get every year specifically for special education. There's just like we get Title I funding, we get Title II funding, federal funds. We get an allocation that we're given, and then we write different projects for that allocation. So local entitlement is specifically for special education purposes. We get an allocation every year. And sometimes if you don't spend it all, there's a carryover amount we have. So we were spending down some of the carryover from previous years. So now that carryover is going to be gone. So that's why we said, let's put some in the contingency because we're not sure we will actually be able to fill them. But we still have funding for ed techs in our local budget that you're looking at now. There are other ed techs funded there. So they're really, it could be local entitlement, it could be local entitlement carryover, or it could also be in our local budget. So we have techs in all of those places.
So to be clear, do those federal funds flow through the state as part of our subsidy?
That's separate monies.
Separate additional. Okay. Thank you.
Just like Title I is separate money.
Any other questions? Oh, good. Danielle.
Jean, maybe you could ask Jen about her part-time science teacher, or you can speak to it. So again, is that another part-time person? It's not somebody who maybe already is covering.
I mean, it's a potential. We have another
Okay.
half-time position. That's a potential. Whenever we can, we try to put those
Yeah.
together. But again, I can think of a couple of positions at the high school right now that we advertise as half-time, and those folks, one person wanted full-time, so they're an ed tech, and another person just wanted the half-time. So they took the half-time. But she was apologized she was unable to be here tonight. But she'll certainly be here next time. But we do have another half-time position right now.
Kara?
I was wondering if Jean or Aaron could just give a quick summary of why the nutrition line is so much less than it has been in the past. I don't recall that, or I don't have notes from that presentation.
Aaron, why don't you come up and you can address why we're asking for that?
Well, it's kind of complicated, but I guess to give you the broad view with all my papers back there, when I took over here, the program was in debt. There was additional local monies allocated to kind of support the program as we dug our way out of that. And so we used them for several years. Then COVID hit and we used them some more. And then since then, our meal counts have gone up. Our subsidization amounts have gone up. And then the various strategies that we've utilized to control costs have resulted in, being in a situation now where we don't feel like we need that much support from the town to keep the program whole. And it certainly isn't going to represent a reduction in the services. It's just a reduction in what the program is saying that, we may need from the local support side of things.
So I'm all about simplicity tonight. That's my mantra. How many bodies? I think for Erin's, she's a rock star, and she hasn't needed to have it subsidized, if you will, through the district nearly to the level it has. It used to be much, much higher than that. And like you said, not only was it much higher, but they were in debt
Right.
on top of that. So they were going even farther past that. So you good with that answer? Okay. Kelly.
I'm curious to know about the thought process behind deferring the halftime social worker from Moore Street School Mass Landing.
I don't, Emily, do you want me to, would you like to address that? Okay.
The reason for the deferment was similar to Will's explanation regarding the halftime position, which is as we looked across, I think something we try to take pride in as a team is looking across the needs of the collective and prioritization, and a feeling that both last year, the addition of the assistant principal at Moore Street School, and this year, the request for the assistant principal at Mass Landing School would better target the immediate needs that we're seeing in the building. So it's not for lack of feeling like that would be a valuable resource, but looking collectively at the ways some of our schools have evolved and which of those pieces are most impactful in the short term.
You might as well stay up there, Emily. So I think the biggest ask this year is the addition of the assistant principal at Mass Landing School. And I know, just having worked with this team of administrators, you are all very thorough and very thoughtful in your process. I would love if we could hear a little more about other ways you looked at solving this problem without adding sort of another administrator, which is obviously a very high level position. The cost is significant. And in terms of the size of the school, as the smallest school that would have 2 full-time administrators, I would just love to hear your thoughts around that.
Yeah. So I'll give you a little historical context because we had a very in-depth conversation a year from this past fall when Julie was first presenting this idea to the team. And some of the other positions we looked at, the most common was a dean of students. So some schools essentially, or sometimes schools will call them like a behavior strategist, somebody whose role is primarily to support behavior of students. Of course, it's a less costly role. And that was one of the reasons we considered it heavily. And I'll be honest, when Julie first brought the conversation to the table, I thought that's where we'd land. The other piece we looked at was a social worker. And what we did then and what I did this fall was to step back and think about what really are the needs that we're experiencing in the building. And several, I'll kind of try to paint the picture for you. So in my building, so I evaluate 47 staff. And I supervise those 47. I support them as needs come up. And I think that's probably the most critical part of my job, in addition to supporting students and families. And Julie was in much the same position. And that level of supervision, coupled with the needs of students, so I have almost 20 students with 504 plans, 48 students with IEPs, in addition to maybe another half dozen in referral. And that work can't be done fully by somebody in a teaching role. So the administrative capacity to attend IEPs, some of the parent involvement that is connected to supporting kids meaningfully who have challenging or complex learning profiles. And so when we had that conversation, for example, if we explored a behavior strategist instead, a teacher who could be responsive when needs arise, the ability for that individual to both partner and support staff. So you can imagine if I'm supporting a teacher with a student in their classroom, I'm also supporting that teacher professionally and sometimes in a supervision capacity as well, right? So often supporting a student or a classroom is multi-layered. And so you can't, with a teaching role, support teachers in a supervision capacity as well. Those two things can't exist in tandem. The other piece we felt like was the ability to work with parents as well. So if there are behavior needs that arise, often it's an administrator that a parent is looking to speak to as follow-up. Again, the special education piece, while not the full picture, is another piece that when we thought of a behavior strategist role, that role is separate from special education. You can't have this kind of like regular education individual be supporting supervision of specialized programs. And then, of course, looking at just the number of both ed techs and teaching staff that I support on a daily basis, as well as evaluate. Again, that's a role that couldn't be filled by a behavioral strategist. So that was the role we probably considered in most depth in trying to look at the day needs we're experiencing in the building. We also considered social work, in part because some of the challenges are behavioral, right? And there are times this week I had Sarah, our administrative secretary, just pull the data for the last 5 days just of how often I'm radioed. So wherever I'm at. And that's been on average of 3.5 times a day. So 3 to 4 times a day. And that's not counting if I'm with a parent. If I'm with a parent, right, then somebody else has got to be found. So having a social worker can be great in some ways, but a social worker is really designed to be working with students individually in small groups and building skills. It's not a role that's meant to be somebody who's like waiting to get radioed, right? Not somebody who typically social workers don't have a strong interest in like supervising staff or coaching adults. Like that's especially school social workers, they want to be working with kids. And so those were some of the things that we considered as alternatives, because certainly an administrative ask is a bigger ask, right? And I don't take that lightly. I don't think the team did. But the needs that we're seeing, both of students and also the capacity to support staff. It is incredibly difficult to have staff who are trying to access me and can't, right? I had staff come this morning and I said, I have 45 minutes open in my whole day. And I ended up supporting a student who was dysregulated for that time, in addition to some. It doesn't feel like that is the kind of community we want to create, particularly for new staff. We have 9 staff who are in their first or second year at Mass Landing. That it's not how we're going to grow and retain staff, quite frankly. And I think those were some of the things that we were exploring when we were looking at other roles.
Thank you.
Yeah. Other questions while I'm up here? Or?
Thanks, Emily. Yeah, I'd be interested in knowing a little more about that role. I know you mentioned a couple of things, but what the person in that role does. I know you mentioned IEPs and 504s and that whole process.
So like what I anticipate if I had an assistant
Yeah.
principal. Yeah. So a couple thoughts. One thing, I'll start with 504. So students who have 504 plans, right now our school counselor oversees those, and it impacts her capacity to do her work. So she provides weekly social emotional learning to all students in the building, as well as facilitates small social groups and supports students one-on-one, sometimes short-term, sometimes longer term. And so really a 504 coordinator is not intended to be in that role. It's how we have it structured right now. So that would be one thing to free up some of our school counselors' capacity to support tier 1 work across the building. Another piece, our RTIB programming, which supports students who aren't in special ed but are developing the skills of emotional regulation as well as some social skills, right now is overseen by a quarter-time social worker. So you can imagine that having a quarter-time employee is a very difficult role if you're looking at supervising programming, because your ability to meet with staff, to review plans, to track students' progress, to support the ed tech who's in that role is really limited. So I anticipate that assistant principal role would oversee RTIB programming to provide more oversight and guidance to that, which allows the social worker then to provide direct service to students as her primary role. And then the other piece, quite frankly, and this is sometimes the challenge, it's hard to articulate because our building isn't huge, is the value of having somebody who's available. And so it is incredibly hard for me to be outside the building when I'm a sole administrator. And it puts a lot of burden on others in the building. So it pulls special education teachers who then struggle to provide direct service for students they're legally required to provide direct service for, it makes me less accessible to supporting staff. So the third and primary responsibility I would see in that role is the person who is the real-time response when behavioral needs come up. So at recess, two students get in a disagreement at Foursquare. They need somebody to process it. I get a bus report about concerns of bus behavior. They're able to go meet the bus driver when the bus driver gets there in the morning. And certainly those are things that I try my best to create capacity to. The challenge is when that is the day-to-day, my ability to support staff is incredibly limited. My ability to provide meaningful feedback, to feel like I can problem solve, in a substantive way, not just a like, hey, I hear you, that's hard. Maybe we can carve time out next week. And that's really where we're at, is it feels like, shoot me an email, what do you have available next week to touch base? And I worry that is problematic for our staff, and particularly for new staff. We have rigorous curriculum that I love. It's a big lift for new teachers, supporting teachers with that, supporting teachers with behavior management, simply being a listening ear for people who feel like they're working really hard and don't feel as effective as they want to be, providing coaching, being in classrooms and helping to work alongside teachers to do the incredibly hard work they're doing. Those are the things that are not happening to the extent that I wish they could now. And having another individual who could have the capacity to be on call a bit more for those day-to-day needs that arise, particularly when students are dysregulated, would allow me to fill the instructional role that I really actually think is the responsibility of the principal. But unfortunately, when there are day-to-day needs, like those will always take priority, right? If a student's unsafe, you have to support that work. And the challenge is then the work that gets sacrificed is the long-term work that really matters in terms of the instructional quality in a building. One thing I'll note too, actually, sorry to jump in, is the other thing we look at is the tricky thing in our district is all our schools. We don't have two parallel schools, maybe Moore Street's the closest but to Mass Landing, but we also, it's easy to look at the position as like an AP ask, an assistant principal ask, but to me, it's a little more comprehensive than that because we're one of the few buildings that does not have a full-time social worker. We don't have 2 full-time office staff, which many buildings do. So it's also looking at kind of like, what are all the places, right? Buildings get creative in like how they lean on different people. I was thinking this morning, like our school nurse used to do check-in, check-out with kids. Like when we had kids who just needed somebody to like give them the rah-rah in the morning and be like an incentive for them to get to school and start off on the right foot. Like our nurse had the capacity to do that. Our medical needs now are such that the medical needs like overflow into our office staff, like our secretarial staff are supporting nursing needs because of kids who have chronic medical conditions, right? So it's like everything's at the margins with the staff that we have with the needs that we have. So it's like an AP ask, but I think it's like looking at the full picture of staff we have, and there are areas that we don't have staff that another building, right, might have preferred to have a social worker or preferred to expand in another way.
Really helpful, Emily. Thank you so much. I'm wondering when the middle school added an assistant principal. Have they always had an assistant principal?
I can provide the history. So I was the second. I was the second assistant principal at the middle school for those, and I was hired as a part-time employee. So I'll put the plug in that sometimes I think you can get competent people, and I wouldn't have applied had it been a full-time role. So I was hired in 2014, and there had been assistant principal the previous year. So the fall of 2013 was the year that was position was added. It was added as a 0.5, then a 0.6, then a 0.8, and then now the 190, like the proposal for the 190 days.
So you set yourself up for this question. Do you think a part-time position might meet the needs you have and sort of ease into the financial burden of it?
Do I think a part-time position would help? Absolutely. If we were talking about like nothing or a part-time, would I be immensely grateful for a part-time? Absolutely. I do think the challenge, like I said, is the nature of the challenge in not being able to guarantee my availability, right? And that's what's tricky right now, is because you can't say to a kid, like, just, like 10:30 is when I'm free. If that's when you could have a tough time, that would be really great. And sometimes that works, right? But that's the tricky thing, is that ability to be like, hey, I know I want to be in this classroom to support this teacher who's struggling with this group of kids and has asked for my kind of support and thinking together. Can you? And right now, honestly, I use my I lean on my school counselor immensely, and she's phenomenal. It's also not the job she was hired to do.
I mean, when we put you into Will's research project on how successful part-time hires are, I mean, I think you drive up the average, so that's good.
Oh,
We can prove that part-time hires turn into great employees. Other questions, thoughts for Emily while we have her?
This is super helpful, Emily, and I think one of the things that I think can sometimes be difficult for us, but also for the voters to sort of understand is sort of the fact of like how without this position, y'all are working incredibly hard to meet the need, right? And so like it's not that there's like dropped balls left and right, it's like you're managing to catch all the balls, but there's an impact of that on staff, on kids in various ways, right? I guess if and that's a little hard to like kind of hard to quantify, right? It's hard to like so I guess given that I guess is there a way you could sort of speak to like give us, or to sort of give to like the voters sort of a sense of like, if we didn't have this position, like really what are like the top 3 impacts of that? Like if we don't have it, if it's not there, like how are we going to feel it? How are the kids going to feel it? How are parents going to feel it? How is the staff going to feel it?
Excellent question. And thank you for articulating, I think, what I've had a hard time articulating, which is like, my job is to make it seem like everything can get done, right? So hopefully that's what I've done, while also internally being like, so I think the places we'd see impact, I think first and foremost is around supportive staff. Staff are feeling the impact of shifts in behavior, and it's not for lack of staff capacity, but staff need support. They need somebody like rolling up their sleeves and sitting beside them and saying like, hey, I hear you. This is hard. Let's problem solve this together. How can I help? Right? When the student I talked about this with a staff member at 4:30 this afternoon, when a student leaves a classroom without permission, that's a safety issue, right? And I have staff right now who aren't telling me because I know I don't have the time to follow up with the kid, right? We want a school community where there are like very clear expectations for kids, right? For 8, 9, and 10-year-olds, we know that's essential, right? So that's about staff support. I do believe it's about staff retention, right? When we think about a career that requires a lot of energy, right? And we have phenomenal teachers in our district. We do, who love kids, who care for them deeply. We want to keep them, and we want to keep them here and joyful, right? We want them to be here. It's not like we want them to be here in like body. We want them to like want to walk in the doors every day. So one is around staff support. The other is around student support and ensuring that when kids are having a tough moment, we have the time to give them and honor them and provide the space they need to develop skills. And the other is for like those day-to-day behavior needs that arise, that we can also nip those in the bud. Those impact kids. I was like sitting here writing an email about bus issues, right? And language on buses. Like, we don't want to say, you know what, like, oh, it stinks that there's language on buses. That isn't okay, but like, just not priority, right? That impacts the climate for all kids from the moment they get on the bus, coming in the door, what recess looks like. The whole day is teaching, right? All of it. And I think the impact of not having that role is removing the potential to provide that kind of support, which we know impacts all kids. This isn't about, the 5% of kids who I invest half my time in. It is about all kids because it's the climate of the building.
Anything else for Emily? Thank you. Any other questions, Maura?
Didn't mean to jump in if someone else wanted a turn. I just remembered something funny. I wanted to bring up bus drivers, and I remembered the other night I had a dream about bus drivers and how we could solve the vacancy problem. I just remember that right now. So, but like, I just remembered that's how much this has like seeped into my my consciousness. So anyway, I was hoping we could talk about that, like our staff vacancies and the challenges there. And I was surprised that 4 of the vacancies are at Durham, and hearing about all of the impacts and increased behavioral needs that we're seeing in our schools. Just, I know every little thing can have an impact and make a difference. And so I'm just wondering that extra time that kids have to spend on the bus, or if they're in class and they don't have the ed tech, both for the support of the kids in the room and for the teacher that's in that room. So, obviously my subconscious thinks this is a very important issue. and I think this is a very important issue, just to make sure that we have those positions, and we've put them in our budget before because I know we think that they're important, and I know we're trying really hard to fill them. So I just was hoping that we could talk more about that and the impacts of that.
I'm just gonna, while people are thinking on that, put a shout out to Jeremy and his team for all the amazing work they're doing to get the kids to school. I was in Massachusetts this weekend with a bunch of other moms from other districts in the close vicinity to us, and they're like, "We haven't had a bus in 3 months." Like, and you just find out that morning, "Yeah, no bus today. Good luck." I mean, pretty consistently. And so the fact that we have not had to do that, we will all knock on wood for that. So just a thank you for all the hard work you're doing. And it's not us. This is not an RSU5 issue. This is a sort of a statewide issue, and it sounds like we are faring better than some. So while it's not ideal, it could be far worse. So.
And I don't know where to go with this conversation. I guess I'm looking for maybe, and I know that administrators have tried to be creative. I guess I'm wondering if we can look to neighboring school districts who have been able to fill their vacancies and see what they've done, and see if any of those things might be right for us. This is just, I know it's an everywhere issue, but this is just the first time since I've been on the board that I can remember such prolonged openings. And I know that I wrote down some notes about Emily saying in ed tech it's such a demanding job and there's so much turnover. And I guess maybe a piece of this too could be, I know we're still waiting to find out in that role, or I guess in all of our support roles, if that law is going to pass, if that bill is going to pass that raises support staff salaries. So I understand that could have an impact as well. On attracting people maybe to those positions. So I would be interested in knowing. I guess we'll probably find out soon if that passes, and then if it does, I'd be interested in knowing the impact of that on our staff in those roles. But yes, I'm interested if we could learn from neighboring districts if they've been able to address this issue.
My cord is short tonight. I was like strangling myself. And I think that's something we constantly talk to other folks. Cynthia and I are part of a larger superintendent's group, and we always we're picking each other's brain constantly on what are they doing, how are they doing it. And I would say, echo what Michelle said as well, is that we have staff members in this district who live in other communities I'm going to be late today because there's no transportation for my student. So I'll say, I got to double shout out to Jeremy for keeping our buses rolling for sure. And we had a conversation Monday. I don't know what was it, like 6:00. Jeremy saying, I got 2 folks that just called out sick with the other folks, and then magically, are we going to be okay? Working on it, and then got him covered, Gene. And that's almost daily that he does. I think any creative ideas. I was telling Kelly, maybe I need to get a sandwich sign and walk down Main Street and say, please, and ring a bell. We'll certainly look for any creative ideas as well. Ed techs, it's really interesting. We're seeing a real ebb and flow of ed techs, and some ed techs we've had that were left another job, a different kind of job to be an ed tech for us, and their response was, "This was so much harder than I thought," and they went back to their other profession. So that's tough. And we've, what I've heard from June is that looking at her cohort of special education directors, there are some districts that have 30 openings for ed techs. So it's really tough in terms of, and I'll kind of look for Kelly to make sure I'm not misspeaking, but when you're looking at the law for that and where our wages are, we're in fairly decent shape, actually, if that law passes. It's not that big of an impact for us, but I certainly know it's a huge impact to many, many, many school districts in the state of Maine, especially rural districts. We're fortunate that we just negotiated a very nice contract for folks. So it won't be that much of a shift for us, if that answers that. But any creative ideas, you have a dream about an idea, give me a call. If we can do it, we'll.
Yeah, I guess, again, kudos again for everything you're doing to keep those buses running, and that's astonishing, and keep those dreams coming. I guess just to maybe follow up on Mara's point, I think, and not to be binary about it, but I kind of wonder whether it's helpful for us to just think about how, like, in one category, we've got the creative ideas, which are the, like, how are we going to get things let's learn from what neighbors are doing. Let's walk down the street with a sandwich board. Let's, we get the creative thing over here. And then the other thing is, like, budget changes, which I would put under not creative. I mean, again, I'm being a little, you got to sort of maybe understand why I'm being a little binary, to sort of be like, at a certain point, like, we are seeing that the landscape is not changing. Like, we're seeing that the landscape for, like, bus driver availability in terms of the state, or ed tech availability for the state, is not changing. It's not, it doesn't seem to be improving. So I guess at a certain point, I'm just wondering, at what point do we kind of throw a different lever and say there's some other changes we have to make to the way in which we're either running the buses, or the way in which we're either sort of meeting the needs that ed techs are currently filling. I guess I don't know. I just wanted to sort of raise that, because I think at a certain point, relying on the creativity of our administrators and our staff is great, but it's also, at a certain point, if we're relying on that creativity in a landscape that's not going to change, I think that's just unfair. Because it's asking for miracles, which I don't think that's fair.
So what lever are you thinking?
I have a 10-page PowerPoint that I've pulled together. No, I don't have the particular levers in my back pocket, other than knowing at one of the previous meetings we did raise the question of, like, what would it look like to create some sort of incentive structure for bus drivers and ed techs, right? Just like that, which would have a budgetary impact, right? So that's not creative, that's budgetary. Just what would that look like? I guess, I mean, perhaps if there was some way that we could just get an understanding of, like, what would that look like? What have other districts done it? Is there something? Is there a range of possibilities, with an understanding of also how that impacts the existing contracts and relationship with the unions? Again, just like to have an understanding of, like, that's a lever and we could pull it, right? And then just be like, oh, we're not pulling it for these reasons. Like, we're not ready to do that. We're not ready to go there. That would be one in a different territory. I mean, this is beyond my expertise, but if we know that the ed techs are needed to meet certain needs at the schools, but we also know that the ed techs are funded at a different level than the full-time teachers, is there some sort of larger structural change that we need to look at to make sure that those needs are met, even if we're meeting them by hiring a different kind of person?
You lost me on that ed tech one.
I mean, everybody who actually knows what they're how this works. So like look the other way or just cover your eyes. Let's say that we know that we need 4 ed techs to cover a collection of needs at Mass Landing School. Since Emily's not going to be looking, she won't know that I'm talking about her. We know that we need 4 ed techs to fill that particular need, but we're having trouble hiring those 4 people because of, as we have heard, the difficulty of finding people at that particular level. Is it possible that we could look at hiring 2 teachers at another level, at the teacher level? Forgive me if I'm not getting the terminology correct. That would allow us to fill those educational needs.
And I feel like we do make those shifts, right? I feel like that's what we did with the teacher. I think it was at Mass Landing, right? This year. And we said we wanted, and we couldn't find the teacher we wanted. So we added 2 ed techs instead.
And that was for the general ed classroom. And I'll speak to special ed. We're talking about special education ed techs, and it's a little bit more complicated because some of our kids require adult support everywhere they go. So that student might have a need when they go to music, or they go to the lunchroom, or they go to the playground, that they would need adult support for that. Our kids, they're not all in one classroom. So they may be pushing into a classroom, or they may be working with a small group in the resource setting. We have, our techs, they may be collecting data for a student's IEP. So it's for the special ed techs, it's a bit more complicated or they might be spread out in many programs. So it might be, we need a tech in our LIFT program for children with some really significant needs, which variety needs, cognitive needs, speech, OT, PT, and then we also might need a tech in the resource room that might be supporting a small group, and we might need a tech in our behavior program that is really one-on-one and following kids. So it really depends on the needs. So it's a little trickier with a special education ed techs from a gen ed tech. Somebody could say, let's get a teacher and combine, and you could do that. And for gen ed techs, we often have a better, our track record of hiring those is usually better.
I guess, yeah. I mean, that makes sense. I guess I would just ask, like, an unfulfilled special ed tech position is still an unfulfilled special ed tech position. Like, it's still unfulfilled, still not there, it's still not being done. So I think again, that's not a criticism of anything that is of any existing sort of management of that, but just saying, if we know that these positions we are not able to hire them, don't we owe it to ourselves and to the staff and eventually to the kids to explore other mechanisms for doing that, even if it is not generally the way it's done? Like the perfect unfulfilled person is still an unfulfilled person.
So my understanding is that it's not just that we're not filling these positions, but that when we do fill them, we turn over the staff very rapidly. I assume we do exit interviews with these people, and we're collecting those data, and we have a pretty good understanding of what the factors are that are causing the turnover.
So we offer exit interviews for anybody who leaves the district, including ed techs. Generally, I think I've had 1 ed tech since I've been here that has accepted. But anecdotally, what I'm hearing for the principals, for example, I know we had an ed tech that left a bit ago. The one I was describing that went through a different position that was shared with the principals. So sometimes the principals might not know some of those people, those folks, what they're doing. And I think part of it is I think in general, what we're seeing in the workforce as well for some of those positions, that people it used to be if you signed them with a school district, you stayed for the year. And, when I started my career a day or 2 ago, teachers, techs, everybody stayed for the full year. Oftentimes they stayed for their whole career. There was a lot of longevity. Over time, what we're seeing is particularly after COVID, people are trying some things out. and seeing if it's a good fit, or they're moving on. So we're seeing that I know Erin's seen that in the school nutrition program with folks she's hired as well. So I think that's a complicating factor as well. And, certainly to your point, Colin, like I'm all for thinking like outside the box. Is there a better way we can do this to hire folks? And the tricky thing is what happens for us sometimes is what we're finding is that we think we know what we need for ed tech support, and then kiddos register over the summer or during the school year, or kids are newly identified that we all of a sudden they need ed tech support. So lo and behold, we need more ed techs. So it's a very fluid. June couldn't be here tonight, but certainly she can address more about the thoughts on that. I don't want to speak for them, but I think that's a complicating factor that we've seen. For sure. And the person that left that I did an exit interview with, that person, it was a different position. It was a tech position, but very different than what she was doing. And she wanted to, it was in a more of a library setting. She wanted to do that instead of the support she was doing.
Yeah, I guess I'm just kind of following up and thinking about what Ms. Grimm was talking about, and how the needs of our kids are kind of increasing as time is going on, and if that's putting additional burdens on our ed techs, that's making the job more and more challenging, and how can we mitigate that factor in terms of retaining staff? And maybe there's economic and salary factors or whatever kind of incentives, but maybe there's some kind of way of restructuring the role so that it's not quite as burdensome.
Interesting idea. It's tough, right? I mean, the needs need to be met. So, how you would probably adjust it would be to provide more coverage, and we can't fill the openings we have. So it's tough. Maura.
Thank you, Jean. I appreciate having this conversation. I know it's a challenge. Like, it seems like an intractable challenge, and I know a lot of districts are struggling with it. So I really appreciate your efforts and all of our administrators' efforts. I was wondering, for those ed tech positions, are all the vacancies we have in special ed? And then I know there's ed techs 1, 2, and 3. Do you know offhand? Do we generally have a lot of turnover, like in the ed tech 1s, or a lot of vacancies in one of the tiers or the other?
In general, we hire 2s or 3s that we have. Kelly, do you have your magic sheet? Actually, Kelly and I have a meeting every week, and we go over every single vacancy in the district and who was there, and was like what's filled now. So we can get more information on those openings for next time. We just didn't bring it with us today. And generally, if I had a magic wand, I would hire only 3s. And the reason I would only hire 3s is that they can do so much more with kids. For their certification, there's so much flexibility of their work with kids. Ed Tech 1s have to be under the direct supervision of the supervising teacher, and there's fewer things they can do in terms of some instruction with children. But we have some ones that have been and are absolutely fantastic employees and do a great job. It's sometimes harder to get 3s than it is 2s and 1s. So that's why we open it up to we'll look at what you have for certification, and we'll work with you, and we can have you work with us for some capacity. So in an ideal world, we have all 3s, but we know that some folks just don't have that. We need the folks. We've got some great employees, and we will tailor what they're doing for us to meet their certification.
Okay. So when we have an ed tech posting,
it's all of them.
It could be any one of those that the person has the certification for. Okay. Okay, great.
So this kind of just goes along with just like all the vacancies that are open. So especially for the bus driver positions that we have, I mean, it's hard, and we're having such a struggle filling those positions. So my thought process is, how many of us have reached out to the new Mainers? Because I know a lot of people are looking for jobs in that category.
And I will say, just on new Mainer hiring, we have hired 3 new Mainers in the district, not as drivers, but in other capacities. Yes. And certainly, if there are folks that could be able to be trained, we will train people. But we do actually have 3 wonderful folks that are working for us right now.
And same with the transportation department. Any application that comes through, we process and go through it very rigorously.
Okay.
I'd also like to take this time to thank all of the drivers, not just me. It takes everybody. We have a couple of retirees that retired a couple of years ago that are now working full-time subs that answer the phone when I call at 5:30 and 6 o'clock. So I'd like to thank them too.
They're better people than me. I would not answer the phone at 5:30 in the morning. Oh, Jeremy, don't go anywhere. Sorry. Maura has a question for you.
Thanks, Jeremy. Could you talk about the training that bus drivers have to have? And because I know we used to have a mechanic in-house. Is that required? Was that just that we had a bus driver / mechanic, or do all bus drivers have to have that training?
No, we
No.
have a mechanic position
Oh,
currently open. We do not
open.
have one right now.
okay. So bus drivers do not have to have, they just have to do the training to drive the bus.
To drive the bus and the
Okay.
endorsements, P&S endorsements.
Okay, gotcha. And how long is that training?
I'm going to say month and a half by
Okay.
the time you do the driving and the testing and the
Yeah.
permit through the state.
Okay. And
We currently have a driver trainer here
great.
in-house.
Oh, okay. And so we're covering the training. Would that typically, would folks have to pay that cost, or?
Some of it we do reimburse, correct? We provide the training, but as far as the permit stuff, no.
Okay, the license.
We do
But
provide the
the
training.
training's free because we provide it. Okay. And do we pay folks for their training time?
No.
Okay. Okay.
Is that in creative box or budget box?
No, you got to keep things really binary. No, that would be hybrid. Yeah. I mean, I guess I'll just say, like, I feel like I want to go back and just, my general sort of meandering around issues, come back to the point of saying, of asking, like, could we get an update on what an incentive structure would look like? And I'll ask that, but I'll also ask you, like, do you think that's a worthwhile effort? In other words, like, is that something that, if we had that information and if the board could consider it, do you think that would put you in a better position in terms of your capacity to hire?
There are definitely other departments, transportation departments doing that, yes. It has been in the news recently.
Kelly.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to circle back to Cheyenne's question. I'm sort of curious if we actually take any proactive approaches to reaching out to some of these populations. And I know we obviously get applications across our desk, but is there some way of reaching out to point people in that community that could help spread the word that these positions are available?
One of our, I think one of our biggest resources is through adult education, and that's sort of how we have found some folks looking for jobs that we've had, we've had luck that way for sure. And we're, like, I say, we're willing to shake every tree possible. That we are RSU5's hiring. I know Ashley's at job fairs, and she's
Indeed.
We have postings like all over everywhere. And I will say Ashley is I hate to say trolling, 'cause that's not probably the right word, but she's looking to say, oh, someone has, they applied. They applied for a custodian position, but they used to be a bus driver. So she's diving deep, and then she's immediately contacting Jeremy. Hey, take a look at this, give this person a call. So we're looking that way. But in terms of the new Mainer population, that's been our biggest success right now, is through adult education. Folks, spreading the word.
I'm just going to beat this drum one more time, and then I promise I'll stop. But I think just, again, that level of creativity that, like, Ashley is doing, that is so appreciated. And, like, but just to think about our responsibility as a board, which is to, like, set the budget to meet the need of the kids at a certain point. I just think it's unfair for us as a board to continue to expect the employees of the district to just continue to have to, like, get creative in all of these different ways, rather than us looking at other ways that we, from a budgetary perspective, could be supporting that need to meet the need of the kids.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't know how straightforward it is, right? I mean, I think there's union issues, there's a lot of different things at play, which could be that, you said we could pull the lever or we could decide not to. It could be that it's not even a lever we can pull, right? So I agree that the idea of getting more information about what is possible for us, right? And it might be what is possible for us in conjunction with our union, because each one is different, right? And our contract, right? There could be things in people's contracts that allow for that sort of thing. Ours currently doesn't, but that doesn't mean it never could, right? So, the idea of researching what does that look like or what are those levers, not just hypothetical, but what actually are they, is probably time well spent. So probably not something we're going to have by next week. So I'm just going to, great conversation around the filling of positions and stuff, but I just want to make sure people have time to sort of talk about the budget piece. What are your feelings about the tax impact? What are your thoughts on, the percentage increase? How successful do we feel putting out a budget at 6.5% increase? Do we think that's tenable? Do we think that the communities are going to be accepting of that? Because at the end of the day, we want to put forward something that meets the needs, but we can also get past. So I would love to hear people's thoughts on that.
I think at the very highest level, it's important for us to realize that this past year has seen a really high rate of inflation, and that's just being reflected across the board in our costs. And so, yeah, this is kind of a high number. It's not as high as some of the numbers we've seen in the past 10 years. And as has been pointed out, the last few years leading out of COVID have been maybe abnormally or unnaturally low. And so we're comparing ourselves to numbers that were really comfortable. And now we're getting into something that's maybe less comfortable, but the economy is kind of in the same direction.
So page 5 of the handbook kind of goes to what Kelly was saying, which is the adopted budget history over time back from 2015. So yeah, this would be the second highest increase in those 10 years. The 777. I remember that budget. That was not an easy budget year. I'll just say that to get it done. Colin.
Yeah, I guess just to that point and to the level of like comfort. I mean, I think also the thing that I was looking at on pages 6 and 7 in terms of like what the what do we call these red numbers? These sort of these savings or what we've taken out of the initial ask, right? The initial 10.35 ask, just running down like what has been kicked into future year, right? Is like there's a lot of staffing positions that we've kicked into future year, which is not necessarily next year, but I think if it's on this document, it means that that's an identified, clear, and present need, and it's not going away. We don't expect it to be going away. So I guess also at a certain point, also building off of what Kelly was saying in terms of the sort of larger economic context, at what point do we start to also just sort of build a tolerance to say, like, we're probably moving into a couple years where it's going to be 5, 6, 7%, right? That it's not that this is going to be like high and then we're going to drop back down to 4 because it was an extraordinary year. Because with those staffing needs just as a given, I don't know, like we're already putting ourselves next year or the year after that in a position where we know we're going to have some substantial increases.
So what we often hear from folks is like, our student counts, our enrollment is growing, but never at the level of our additional positions are not being added at the same rate that that the student population is growing. It's not like, oh, we got 30 more kids, we added one more teacher. That makes sense, right? We're adding positions that don't necessarily directly correlate with increased enrollment numbers. So the feedback I hear and is, how sustainable is that, right? Like, we would love to be able to do everything for everybody, right? And we'd love to have one teacher for every kid, but that's not sustainable, right? So the question is where's the balance? I would be hesitant to say, just buckle up and get ready for 7% for 3 years. I'm not sure that's necessarily in our best interest. But that's just me.
I hear that. I also hear we've heard from almost every administrator that the needs of the students have increased significantly over these last few years. And I also want to recognize just the amount of work that's been put into this since September by the administration and by Jean and everyone who's put a lot of time into this and been really thoughtful and considerate about that 6.5 number that has changed already. So I want to recognize that, and I appreciate in the budget brochure this year that we have explained that, all of the meetings, all the time that's been put into it, so that the taxpayers and the voters can know that it's not, just this meeting that we're talking about the budget. It's something that's been considered for a long time. And I really appreciate everyone's thoughts, and Colin, I really appreciate your points tonight as well.
I was just hoping, since Kelly's still here, maybe she can help me out a little bit on this. With the undesignated fund balance and sort of the spending down of having the under 9%. I know in Finance Committee we had talked a little bit about, I understand the importance of not creating a fiscal cliff, but I'm just wondering if between the sort of 5% that was the norm and the 9% that's now allowed, like, is there more wiggle room to put more money into the budget?
So of course there's always more wiggle room to put it in. It's becoming dependent on it, right? It is creating the cliff, because eventually you will create the cliff. And so that's, honestly, largely why we started looking at kind of the alternatives to it, which was to establish, these contingency articles or reserve fund articles that would allow us for those things that are on that cusp of, we're not really sure we actually, we're identifying it as a need, but are we really going to fill that position next year? There's still some, because we do this process so early, honestly, we still don't know all the variables. And so, instead of becoming reliant upon it to reduce taxation, because it's one-time use, right? If you don't replenish it with unexpended monies at the end of a school year, and you've relied on using that 900,000 and it's totally gone next year, and we'll just, not that it's going to happen, but if we were to completely drain that contingency and we go into next budget year without any contingency to use to offset taxation, you automatically have a $900,000 increase to taxation, right? So while the number kind of creeps up and down, it's relatively high. In what I would consider high, I would like to see it more down around the 500,000 level. But I'm dealing with the cards I was dealt when I returned. And so, again, I will do, my job is to do my, to get direction from the superintendent, who gets direction from the board, right? So I'm going to do what you ask me to do, but I'm also going to identify to you that it's one-time money, and eventually you will create a cliff if we continue to use it. Because another thing that we're doing with creating these contingencies, instead of saying to you, hey, we're going to put this position in and then maybe not fund it, and then we definitely have money to dump into a contingency fund, or that becomes undesignated. And we removed, if you remember, as we went down through that document in February, we removed all of the contingencies in the budget. We used to build in contingencies for that purpose. We have removed those. So as we fine tune numbers within the budget and get like tighter and tighter with, what we're actually budgeting for, like every body that's in this budget is a body that's already here, or it's a vacant position that we are hoping to fund. That's what your turnover budget is. And so I just hesitate as we really look to fine tune these numbers and remove all contingencies and establish the contingencies fund, that we continue to, or maybe up the ante, I guess, with what we're using to help offset taxation. I will also get on my soapbox about there's, I think, almost all new directors except for a few. And what we're starting to identify, as you know, the energy audit is in process, right? We are updating all of our own capital projects plan, right? That's in progress. We're creating a vehicle replacement list because none of that work has done. So there are a number of things that over the next couple of years we're going to come to the board with. And ideally, what we'd like to do is utilize some of this unallocated fund balance in order to establish those reserve programs so that we can get on a rotation to continue to replace buses and to replace vans that we now haven't really been replacing since, we've been buying them out of COVID money, but we haven't bought them within our own budgets. So there's a lot of things that we're kind of pulling apart and trying to get through and work through these plans that we'll bring forward to you as we can kind of get our legs under us and get them established. So that future uses of fund balance will probably be largely directed towards capital projects and vehicle funds, and still just having a more of a maintenance type capital projects amount that runs through the budget of that like 445 that we're doing, but like larger projects that we can do, panel septic system, right, out of capital reserve. So I always talk a lot, so I'll stop.
Nope, that's why I wanted you up there, because I knew you were going to do a much better job than me trying to explain it. So thank you very much. I just appreciate the insight around that and how it is important to be careful of that. So thank you.
And I also think, as we've asked our administrators to take a closer and closer look at their spending and find, some of these savings that had historically been in the budget, that's what's created the undesignated fund balance. So as you rely on those and take them out on the front end, you can't then expect them to then be there on the back end to replenish the undesignated fund balance. So as we get tighter and tighter, like Kelly said, there's going to be less wiggle room. Maura.
Thank you, Kelly, for the explanation. And I definitely appreciate that scenario and how if you use the money on the front end, like it's not going to be there the next time. Am I doing the math correctly that if we use the amount that you have proposed, the total 1.837 million from the undesignated fund balance this year, that what we'll have remaining, not including any excess funds we have from this year, of 2.79 million?
I haven't done the math, but I'm assuming that you just scratched on a piece of paper.
I don't have the brain for it.
Just remember that I have a note here that we are potentially going to add an Article 5 reserve as well for 47,500. So that number is going to change again.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, I would just be interested in knowing that. I know there'll be additional funds added from things that we didn't expend this year. Just because 5% of our current budget, again, if I'm doing the math correctly, would be 1.64 million. And on NPR, I was driving today and I heard another town is challenging their school district because they said their undesignated fund balance is too high and asking them to give it back to the taxpayers. So I know the state hasn't asked for it back, but it caught my attention.
Yeah.
And I know this is going to go back down to the 5% in 26, 27. Is that right?
For 25, 26, it
25,
actually
26.
goes back down.
Okay.
Which is why you will see, we will get our vehicle replacement plan and our capital projects plan in line, and you'll probably see a request that will actually fund some of those, those projects come through as reserve funds, because it's the number, the 5% is unallocated or committed, right? So for example, right now we are we're 1,286,447 over the threshold
At the 9%.
at the 9%, correct. And then when, again, in the timing of going back down to 5%, that gives us directors enough time to kind of get those plans together so that we can come forward to you next budget season and talk about how we're going to address a lot of the things that we're actually finding that need to be addressed as well without having huge spikes in our taxation budget.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, and could have a big impact on our community if we weren't doing that kind of forward thinking and planning. I guess my thought is that we did see high inflation, as Kelly mentioned, and so I think we have the 900 in there, and I guess I would just ask, is that enough? I feel like it's maybe times like this when our costs spike up. But I guess those are ongoing costs. When our costs spike up and our community is potentially facing a bigger increase than they've been used to, that's a good time to use it. But again, I guess you have the dilemma of like, if you use it on the front end, then it's not there on the back end.
Right. Yeah. It's like when's the right time to pull that trigger or that lever, if you're calling. Now I just picture that song, the Hi, My Name Is, with the button. Yeah. Sorry. Anyway.
Michelle, could I just say, so if we increased it, and I can't stress it enough, like, so say we go up 200,000 this year, and our intention is to go back down to 900 next year. That's $200,000 that we need out of taxation next year without any increases whatsoever, right? That's just a straight one-time use of the money. If we use it and it comes out of that formula, if we use it and it lowers all the numbers in the formula and you don't use it again, it's an automatic increase without giving giving any negotiated raises or benefit cost changes or anything. It's an automatic 200,000. So, those are just, again, I will do what the board and the superintendent wish, but at the same time, it's my job to tell you, like, these are the things that happen as a result of just, hey, look, here's a pot of money, let's use it. Once you use it, it's gone. It's like your own savings account, right? If there's nothing there to put, to replenish it, and it builds dependency. It's because when are we going to step off of the 900,000?
Right. Never mind higher. Yeah. So I have a question about undesignated fund balance and uses of it. I'm not necessarily in favor of increasing the offset to taxation. I am concerned about the capital reserve. And now what we know is that it will all come out for the septic tank out of that reserve because we can't use it this year. We can't get it done this year. And I'm concerned about having $50,000. I mean, that's if a piece of equipment goes or something big happens, that is our rainy day fund for all of the capital projects in the district. I would, if we know, I mean, it's one thing to be like, well, this might happen and we'll put it in there. And if we don't use it, it's still in there. I would be more supportive if we know it's going to come out and what the dollar amount is, somewhere between 350 and 450, whatever you guys decide on for that. But I would be more supportive of putting that whole amount into the capital reserve and then draw it down from there. So we are left with the same amount we started with, which is our rainy day fund. Like, I don't want to plan on using it and knowing our capital reserve is then at a very relatively small number for 6 buildings and a lot of potential issues. But that's me. So I would be in favor of moving more. So 125 for the COP grant, fine. And I would think we would put at least the 350 that we know is going to come out for the septic system in there.
Duly noted.
Anyone else have a thought on that? You have another, go ahead.
Do you have a ballpark sense of what it would take us, like the dollar amount it would take us to get from 6.5 back to 5?
Do you want to hear the number?
Yeah. Yes.
$579,500 in reductions.
In reduction. The subsystem. Yeah. So Pownell, we just got to build an outhouse for Pownell. A lot of, yeah, it's fun.
That's not even in the budget.
Yeah.
Right.
We were so close.
Yeah, in order,
So,
to get to 5%, we need to reduce
So
579.
if we wanted to do that, other than cutting existing programming or making cuts to existing staff, et cetera, we would be looking at things that are in that category 1. So we would be needing to get rid of the bus replacement, the capital project funding increase, the assistant principal position, the guidance, the science teacher. Oh, the technology. Yeah, sorry about that. The special education teacher, the grade 4 teacher. That would get us there, right? Okay.
And I'm not sure any of us support it at this point, right? But it's like, let's think about what is the number? What would we be sacrificing to get to that number? And is that worthwhile? And that seems like a lot.
So I do have a few more numbers because I thought this might come up tonight. So to drop 0.5%, 195,000. 0.74 is kind of the closest I could get. 287,500 would have to be reduced. To lose 1%, 390,000. 1.25 is 487,500. And to get the 1.48% is the number I already mentioned, which was 579,500. So again, a 0.5% reduction is 195. A 0.74 reduction is 287,500. A 1% reduction is 390,000. 1.25 is $487,500. And a full 1.48 to get it to 579,500.
I'm sort of curious. We saw the budget for RSU 10 and it was a pretty high increase versus last year. Does anybody have their ears to the ground, Jean, about how the local districts around us, their budgets are shaping
I
up?
do, and I can share that information next time, unless Kelly has something that she can share now in front
Kelly
of her.
has the sheet.
She has, because I don't have it with
for
me,
those who
but
have-
Kelly has the magic sheet.
So, and this isn't the Cumberland County one that superintendent's group actually did. I'm accessing the one that the business managers circulate because, there's always 900 spreadsheets that go out during budget season. I'm utilizing the one that the business managers are filling out. So right now, first pass for Falmouth, 895 with a 10.15 impact to taxation. And RSU 10, you mentioned, is 5.16 with a 10.48 impact to taxation. But
Did they have a fiscal cliff? Did they
I don't
fall
know.
off their cliff?
I'm not looking in their details. I'm just looking at what they put in the sheet. But they are again, these are original, like put it out their numbers, and their boards are working on their budgets as well. Yarmouth right now is 7.70 with a 5.96 impact on taxation. And I don't really see anyone else in our cohort on this group, but Gorham is on here, 7.62 with 11.41, first draft only. So Augusta's 6.55 with 10.84 to taxation. Lewiston was on here, 13.68 with 36.83 on taxation. That's the number that's in here on the spreadsheet. So, yep.
Was the one between Gorham and Lewiston? Augusta. Thank you.
Augusta, yep. RSU 57, budget still in progress, 6%, 8.81. RSU 34, they just put their numbers. I don't know like their locations necessarily. RSU 34 is 4.19 with 12.58 on taxation. RSU 38, 7.56 with 10.94 on taxation. RSU 71, 13% with year over year with 14% to taxation. RSU 67, 4.21 with 4.06. Wouldn't you like? We would all, like to be them, but I'm not sure what's going on there. RSU 28, 7.89 with a 7.99 to taxation. Saco 5.53, 4.75 to taxation. Sanford 6.3 with 11.10 to taxation. Wiscasset 2.44 with a 6.12 to taxation.
So it makes you wonder what people were doing in the prior years that their small expenditure or their expenditure increases are being far outpaced. So we should be happy that ours are at least in line with the expenditure increase, right?
Okay. Or do they have like other factors like an increase in subsidy or, you know what I mean?
Or decrease in subsidy,
Right.
right? It's probably so. Just for what it's worth, if anybody's watching this and interested in the numbers, I was looking at the ED 279, obviously, which drives our required local contributions, and looking at the increases in those. And even though the required mill from the state is less than the required mill was last year. So last year it was 697. I think it's 662 now. So that's how much we have to raise per $1,000 of valuation. The valuation in the district has gone up materially. And the biggest increase in valuation was in Durham at over 10%. And remember, that's a 3-year average, which means it's gone up even more in the last year than that, right? Because that's just the average from the last 3. So that drives our required local contribution. That's why that number is higher. I think Pownell's went up 7, and I did I don't know, I wrote them all down, but in the 6 to 7% range for Freeport was the increase over the prior year's valuation. So a lot of the tax impact is driven by that. What the state says we're required to raise. If you look at the difference in EPS from last, so essential programs and services, what the state says it should cost to educate the kids in RSU5 this year versus last year. And we have some more enrollment, but also they take into account increases in expenses. The total cost to educate went up by 4.4% from last year to this year. So not a lot, probably more than we've seen in prior years, but we're looking at the 6.5, right? So just for perspective, that's one of the things I looked into was, what's driving the tax impact piece of it. And the difference, because historically we've seen relatively similar numbers between Durham, Freeport, and Pownell in terms of the tax impact. So this is a little bit more disparate than we have seen in the last couple of years in terms of what that looks like. So I think the driver of that is the required local contribution driven by the increase in valuation in Durham. So for what it's worth.
And again, we're basing it off of last year's valuation with no anticipated growth, right? So within your own community, and that building's still happening within your communities, and so there's always some level of expected growth that will help again absorb some of that increase, but we work with what we have, which are our last year's numbers. So
right. So this is kind of the worst case scenario in terms of the tax impact.
Correct.
But also a reminder that this is just the school part of your tax impact, right? So your municipal budget is on top of this, right? So any increases in the county and increases in the town budgets are in addition to this 6.7, 4.6, and 6.1. So, I mean, I think it's reasonable relative to what we're seeing in other districts. I mean, it doesn't seem crazy out of the box given the price increases we've seen. But I think we just need to be ready to have those conversations loudly and frequently between now and referendum. to make sure people understand. You know, I'm not supportive of any of the requests from this. I know these people only ask for what they need to deliver. But I also know we're going to get the question of, in a year where there's 7% inflation, should we also be adding all these new positions in that same year? Like, is that too much to ask in 1 year? So we just need to have really good answers to that.
I think just on that, I agree absolutely, and I think that I'll just say that I think our administrators and our directors have given really good answers to those questions. So I think we have them, and so we just need to be ready to actually look at our notes and deploy them when we are asked, because y'all have done your job. Thank you so much.
Danielle.
I just have a question about like the money that's set aside in the reserve for like the tennis and the track. Like there's money in there and we're adding more, but we're not really spending any.
Do you want to know why?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't understand that.
So the track we set up when we built the track with the goal of having enough money in there at the 10 or 15, I don't remember now, year mark to replace the track or the turf. I don't know. One of them only had like a 10 or 15 year life. So instead of having to come up with $700,000 to $800,000 or bond it, we said, well, we know this is going to come. So why don't we just start saving now? So when the time comes, it's in the account and we just cut the check as opposed to one big spike. And for the tennis courts, similarly, but a much smaller scale, the tennis courts need to be replaced. And we had historically just been sort of patching them and filling the cracks. And so as a effort to make progress towards replacing them, we started that reserve to say, and I don't remember the number. I don't know if anyone does. And Eric probably doesn't because he wasn't here when we did it. I feel like it was like 250, 300,000. Was it? Yeah. To fully replace those courts. And obviously that was a couple of years ago, right? So so that was the goal for that, was to make progress towards how we're going to replace those courts. So
yeah, I'll just say I think that's a very helpful clarification, because I think I also had in my mind that it was just sort of like the tennis courts like need a lot of love all the time, and tennis is so great. But actually, it's that we're on a payment plan with our future selves who need to replace these tennis courts at a very particular time. Tennis is also awesome.
I mean, it's basically what we're looking to do for the vehicle replacements. And, you know, I think it's sound fiscal policy to try and start saving ahead of time for those things. And yeah.
So I guess that raises a question in my mind. If the tennis courts already need to be replaced and the cost of replacing the tennis courts is going up, are we putting enough money towards that project to get it done in a timely fashion?
I don't know. I mean, that's always the dilemma, right? It's always the time value of money. So you want to pay interest on it and borrow to do it now, or do you want to save for it and have to save a little longer because the cost will be more when you do it down the road? I mean, that's always the balance, I guess. And not knowing what the dollar amount was, I can't tell you. So maybe we can find that. Maybe we'll put that note to find out at least what the estimate was. If you need me to just swing by Craig's house and ask him, let me know.
Yeah, I guess I'm asking because I'm hearing people say they need to be replaced currently. So like, how urgent is this issue? And it should be something that we're pushing up, or is it just something we can kick down the road several years?
And I'll just say to that, it's something that needs to be done. But when we look at the other needs right now, for example, the septic system in Pownell and what the facilities ops committee heard tonight about other needs in the district, yes, they need to be placed, but can they still function with other fixes right now until those other things, I guess as we just, you decide as a board what really rises to the top. And it's really tricky when you say you have a failing septic system that's at the top.
And there was a year that we decided to not put in anything to the tennis reserve
I think that
fund.
was the COVID year.
The COVID year.
Mhm.
So we did at that point say this wasn't as big of a priority just because we had a lot of other things on it. So I think that we've been trying to keep it in there because we didn't do that 1 year. So we are probably behind, I would say, you know, on our goals. But again, it's one of those things, the priority is hard.
Yeah, I know that the cost has gone up probably since that quote. So now we may not know when the timeline will be, like when we have enough money saved, but as part of maybe the capital planning and stuff the facilities committee is doing, maybe if we could have an idea of when they think we might be able to replace them, that way the community knows. Although I don't know, I know we probably don't want to make any promises because you never know what could happen. Yeah, that'd be interesting. And I just to switch gears, I wanted to see if we could also talk about technology since we haven't touched on that yet.
Good evening. Yeah.
That'd be a good idea. Hi, I was wondering, since technology is another one of our biggest, well, staff. To be clear, the salary and benefit is our biggest, like by far. But since that's also a big request, I would be hesitant to take things out because I'm assuming if those devices don't get replaced this year, they'd need to be replaced at another time, and that you'll have other asks for us next year. Is that right?
Yes. So it's just somebody is going to wind up using an older device for an extra year, and it's really just pushing that out another year and saying, okay, somebody's going to use an older device this year, and then that means that a group of people next year are going to use an older device, and so on and so forth. And so that just sort of, it's one of those things that cut it, or I'm listening to this discussion. I'm not sort of saying like we need to do this, you know, like slamming my fist on the table. It's more it's one of those situations where if we don't try to kickstart a replacement plan, it's just kicking the can for somebody moving forward, or for different groups of folks moving forward.
And the other costs. So I see the device replacement purchases for the MLTI devices being the 101,000. So okay, I see projectors, audio systems, that's other equipment. So the device replacement will be an ongoing cost, but I feel like I'm asking you to just guess for next year, which I don't think is probably very helpful.
And I to be honest, I can't. I mean, I have started thinking about it because we do have two significant leases that end next year. Of course, that those leases are ending as those devices are kind of reaching their viable lifespan for how heavily they're used in the middle school and the high school. So I can't necessarily say for sure what next year is going to look like. But yeah, the additional increase. So there's kind of a mixed bag of stuff. There's a couple software items that would really greatly improve our practice. There are, as you said, more projectors and audio systems. And the reason for that is really just kind of a simple math problem, which is that most of the projectors that are in place here in this district were purchased in kind of the 5 to 10 year ago timeframe. And we have about, I want to say it's something like 250 to 300 teaching spaces. And so if you, or spaces with a projector, I should say. And so if you just do simple math where we're replacing 8 of those a year, like we're expecting a lifespan of like 30 years per projector, right? And it's just not realistic. And we're seeing, you know, we can replace bulbs until we're blue in the face, but it's just not a realistic lifespan. And the same thing sort of goes with the audio systems to a little bit of a lesser degree, but similar situation where if we have 200 of those across the district, replacing 10 of them a year is just expecting an unrealistic lifespan from the rest of them. So those are increases, but I would anticipate that those would be, barring a catastrophic incident, I wouldn't anticipate increases to those lines as well, or on top of that. And then there's also a pool of software that the Department of Education or federal funds have been paying for the last 3 or 4 years.
So that's not in here then.
Those are in there as part of
okay.
that. That's kind of so it's 101 for devices, and then I don't remember the exact number, around 99. It's around 200 total. That 99 is kind of a mix of those 3 categories.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Yep.
You spoke about the need to develop this technology and equipment replacement plan, right? I guess, do you have either now or is there something in development, a kind of an idea of like, what is our sustainable like number that we're trying, either that we sort of know it's going to be at least this, but we expect it's going to be a little bit of an increase each year because technology costs are going to be increasing. But I mean, I'm looking at this 200,000 and sort of saying, is that the number that we should get used to? Or are we trying to kind of in 2 to 3 years get it to be like, oh, like we're gonna, that we need to catch up, but then we're hoping it'll be more like 50,000 each year of an increase.
Yeah, it's really hard to say. We have a lot of devices in this district, so 2,100 students. We're currently 1-to-1 K-12. We had a kind of a conversation both with our admin team and a brief conversation with our admin team, and then also when I presented my budget about if we are going to stay 1-to-1 K-12. But that represents 2,100 devices plus around about 450 staff, something like that, and then an assortment of other devices on carts and things like that that are used for specialty purposes. So it's a lot, and I think I've been thinking about what FY26 is going to look like, not to like jump ahead, but just more because with those leases finishing up, it allows us an opportunity to really reevaluate. Do we want to be leasing devices that are depreciating assets the moment we hand them to kids? Do we want to be purchasing devices outright, and how could that function? And then how do we get there to where we so I think the long and the short of it is it really depends on which direction we want to go there, and that's going to dictate a lot of things, mostly because the financing has typically been 4-year financing that we've done, and so really that represents back of the envelope math, 4-year financing for a whole high school, that really represents 1 grade level if you're purchasing them outright, if you're getting 0%, which we probably won't now. So that's the other part of the calculation. And I think, so I don't have a number that I could say. I don't anticipate this is a big increase. I know. I don't anticipate another increase like this. I think this is sort of an opportunity for us to take care of some of the devices that are longer in the tooth before we can reevaluate and look at the longer term purchase plan. But it really is, so much of it is dependent on whether we kickstart this year or if we're waiting until those leases finish next year.
Cool. No, that's super helpful. And I think I would also just love to see the plan for just like getting rid of computers. Just like, what would that look like? Just like going back to, I don't know, typewriter.
I don't know how many typewriters we could get our hands on. I don't know if we could,
again, it's like that's not my problem. That's your problem.
Yeah, it would be a lot of the classrooms would get noisier. The clack clack. No, I understand the sentiment. I think everybody who works with technology has sort of a pipe dream of in the future that they will get to some sort of ascetic lifestyle and never touch technology or a phone ever again. And I would be lying if I said that I hadn't had that thought. But I do enjoy my work nonetheless.
So, and maybe this goes back to your question. I mean, I think of it sort of similar to the capital budget, right? We say, okay, there's 400 or 445 every year that we're spending.
Yeah.
And what we spend it on varies. Like sometimes it's doors, sometimes it's windows, sometimes it's roofs, right? Is it something like that in the budget that, for equipment replacement and might be projectors, might be laptops?
That's where we need to get to, and we're just not there right now. We do not have that figure in the budget to represent replacing each device on the district on a predictable timescale. And that's where I would like to get to. That's kind of that's like the holy grail. I've been a tech director. This is my 11th year as a tech director. I have not gotten there with any of the boards that I've worked with, where there's been a predictable replacement cycle, device replacement plan that everybody was happy to adhere to. It was always sort of like, like that looks okay, 3-4 years from now. But when push came to shove, sometimes that would get cut or some stuff would get bumped out a year. So it really just, that's where I would like to get to. But we don't have a clear picture on that yet, because it really looks different. It looks different depending on how many devices we're doing this year, how many we're doing next year, whether we're leasing or purchasing, or in which direction we go in that, or a mix of both. So, yeah.
Or maybe you flip it around and start at the other end and say, this is the budget. What can you get done?
Yeah.
And then that helps you plan how long it would take, right?
Yep.
And then if you go, okay, we're expecting 30-year life cycles, this isn't enough, right?
Yes, and that's helpful. That's helpful for thinking that in terms of like projectors and things like that. With devices that staff and students are using, I think with what's in the budget now, we're sort of anticipating like a 6 or 7 year lifespan for most of the devices, and we may have to push it on some of those to get to that point. But I just know that at a minimum, the devices we have, we have devices K through 5 that are not going to make it in terms of software updates, security patches, and also just kids being hard on devices, even though they're staying in school. And then 6 through 12, it's sort of the opposite. We have a very sturdy device, but we have kids that are extremely hard on them. So it's expecting that in this environment, especially with 2 of those years having been, extremely heavy use, or a year and a half of that being extremely heavy use during hybrid and fully remote periods of time. It just, we're just, I don't know, we're just trying to figure it out.
Are we good with technology? Thank you.
Thank you.
Other thoughts, questions, feelings overall on the budget? Asks of the Jean and the administrative team on what they'd like to see coming back next week.
Can I recap what I have so far to make sure I didn't, would that be helpful? And I know Kelly's doing notes too on sort of. So in terms of reserve accounts, there are a couple of asks there. A reserve account for guidance in the article that lives in. Looking at what it looks like to push in an additional $350 into capital reserve accounts. Also get an estimate. What was the estimate and when was the estimate for the tennis court? And the last thing I had written down was looking into the possibility of a bus driver incentive structure, and is that possible? That one may be harder for us to get for next week, but we'll do our best with that, just because there are a lot of other moving parts with that. Was there anything else we were supposed to do? And also, I know there was an ask, like, what's at the end? Like, if we do all these things for reserve accounts, what do we anticipate that we'll have? I heard that too.
I think just something that I would appreciate is just a kind of a look at those level 3 teacher positions that we're either putting into reserves or into future year, and not to say like which of them do you want to pull into this year, but just to say like what really are we talking about with those? Like, for example, the grade 5 teacher, that's a reserve account. We know that the year 4s are going to continue on into 5th grade, and right, so like it's not going to go away. So that's just how are we planning for that? Are we really talking about the DCS special ed position, the district nurse, the Moore Street and Mass Landing shared 0.5 social worker, and the standardized testing coordinator? Are those do we really have to have those next year? Like, is that like definite? Like, we really need them. Like, we really would need to have them, or that's really like the next 5 years or so. Like, how imminent really are those needs?
It's interesting because one of the reasons, you know, we haven't always gotten what all of the requests were, right, that didn't get into the final budget, is because they may or may not have been fully fleshed out. So it could be that they don't know, right? That, you know, like, we think this might be a solution. And we've seen that in previous years where, you know, something was, what's their favorite saying, on the cutting room floor, right? And then it comes back in a completely different iteration. Like, you know, we thought about this, we saw what we had, and we actually think this is a better solution to that issue when it does finally get kind of fully thought out. So it might be that they don't know the answers to all those questions, but it's good questions to ask.
Yeah, but I think just to that point, I think it'd be helpful to know like which of those is it? Like for the grade 5, I think we know that. Like that's, again, that's my sort of assumption, is that we know that that's not a, like, there could be a more creative solution to how we teach 5th grade.
I mean, there might be
The typewriter thing that we were talking about earlier.
I mean, but I think that's why that one's in a reserve and not a future year, right? So that one is like, we think it's more likely than not it's going to happen. So, but we don't know for sure. So that's kind of how I read the reserve column. But
I'd also be interested in a possible ed tech incentive.
yeah, and I just want to throw out there, you know, when we're talking about impacts of the way we're looking at doing it now versus previously having it, you know, things in the budget, I appreciate the idea of the reserves for things that may happen or may not happen, but just keep in mind that if all of these happen, that's straight increases we're adding on to next year, right? Because we didn't fund them in the local budget this year. I mean, that's potentially 7+ positions coming directly, a straight add, unless we want to cut people in the district, right? So just keeping that in mind for next year around, you know, additional ads, because anything that's in the reserve that gets added then becomes essentially an ad for next year to keep the people we have. Am I thinking about that correctly?
Yeah, that was also my point. Yeah.
Just hadn't thought of that. So just like thinking about it now, because that's a lot of positions for next year with other positions that Colin was mentioning, and that's worrisome. And again, that's because like we're funding it, essentially we're shifting the undesignated fund balance over, so we're putting it in those reserves the one time, but then next year we'll have to fund it again. So I just had not, right, because yeah, if it's used, right. But we were anticipating, I think Kelly had done on the sheet, a lot of them said anticipated balance at the end of the year 0. Right. So, right. Yeah. That we had plans to use them. We're not just putting them in a reserve that we might use one day, but we're not really sure what it's for. It's for a reserve, and we have a definite idea,
right,
of something we want to do.
Right. So really, you know, our our increase is, assuming we fill those positions we think we're going to fill, is actually materially higher than 6.5. And so we all should feel comfortable in those positions. Like it's great that they're not coming out of taxation this year, but it's a lot harder to change your mind once there's people in the positions, right? Then you're cutting positions. You're not, it's kind of like we're looking at the special ed teacher now who is funded out of local entitlement. It's not like we're adding a new teacher, it's an existing teacher. If we choose not to do that, we are cutting a position, right? Might not be an actual person because there might be turnover and we just don't refill a position, because I know that happens. But, these positions that we're funding out of reserves, we better feel pretty comfortable because they're going to get added in next year if we fill them.
Yeah, I guess just to that point, I mean, maybe it might be helpful if Jane, if you and Dr. Sellers looked at those 6 ed tech special ed positions and just kind of looked at like what would that mean if we, for example, just decided to not create that reserve this year and effectively like not expect that we will have them, effectively like remove those 6 positions from the equation.
And some of those are filled.
No, I know.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. Like,
so actually
like,
cutting.
No, and yeah. So, but I think that would just be helpful to have like in a kind of simplified version of like, what would that look like if we had to take away these 6 positions that are either currently filled or we have identified that there is a need? Like, what would be the impact on that, even in terms of our meeting like legal requirements?
We wouldn't meet FAPE for some kids. We would not meet the needs of the IEP.
Right. Just
So
to that
kind of a
point.
big deal.
So I think probably conversely, what might be helpful is what would the budget increase be if we funded those out of, like, if they were positions we were funding, right? And maybe it's not all of them. I mean, I would say definitely all the ones that are currently filled, right? I mean, just to know, because I think what I would not want to do is tie our hands for next year, right? We're like, oh no, this is a reasonable amount. We got this passed. But we've basically created the increase for next year already with no other things added. Kelly?
Speaking to the special ed techs specifically and referring back to Dr. Sellers' presentation, I was under the impression that we really, because these were previously coming out of local entitlement, or they are kind of required in order to maintain maintenance of effort. And if we don't have these funded somehow, we, like you said, will not meet the needs of our kids. Am I understanding that correctly?
And maintenance of effort's a little bit different issue with that, but this is more about meeting the needs of the kids on the IP, because we're not putting them in the local for that. We're putting them there in our undesignated. But we can play with what it would look like pushing a variety. We'll come back with that, what it would look like pushing them into the local and not an undesignated.
Because really this is just a strategy to ease them into the local budget. Right. Well, some of them is if they end up being needed. Some of them, like the maintenance of effort and the, meeting the FAPE, is we need them. We have them. We just have to figure out how to pay for them.
Yeah, I mean, I think that might be the thing that, again, if there was sort of a way to whittle it down to be like without 4 positions, we cannot meet our legal requirement. And so then it's not a question to your adjective earlier. It's not about comfort,
right?
Right. It's like, it's about like, it's a noun. It's about like, we just like, are we accepting we're going to put them in next year? Right. It's not, it's like, it's just, but if it's two that would get us to the requirement, that's helpful to know. Then it is like, oh, then we have some sort of choice about those other 4 positions. Those are very different conversations.
I agree. And I think, what's going to come out is that, probably 4 of those at least are going to be required. So then we come back to, if those are really required, they're kind of off the table for considering not doing them. So are we comfortable with everything else that we've added, right? Because if we said that the increase was $240,000 higher, there might be other things we added that we would have had to move to a future year, right? And I know it's getting late and I'm getting tired. So just kind of thinking through the ramifications of doing it that way. And maybe I'll wake up tomorrow and be like, no, that's not what it means. It's fine. But I just want to put that out there. But that's kind of how I'm thinking about it right now. Yep.
I just would like to say that the cake that Candy brought was really good.
Always is. So
Just want that. I just think that just needs to be on the record.
Oh,
Okay.
I will. So that's what I really want to know is when you're no longer on the board, does that mean we don't get cake anymore? Can I swing by? Yeah.
Ask one more question. Can you explain to me for the one, or Kelly, these one-time costs like the strategic planning consultant and the Pownell? Well, I guess that's capital reserve. So
Yeah.
there's always going to be money going into capital reserve in our budget.
Yeah.
But like this $37,000, if it's in the reserve fund, it's funded, so we don't have to worry about that in the
Yes.
next year's budget. Are there any other things like that?
The one-time ones?
Yeah. Maybe in the well, I guess it's hard to know.
Well, we talked about the ed techs, the capital, right? That's the COP grant money. The strategic consultant would be one time. And then, I mean, the MLS teacher obviously would be recurring probably. The multilingual teacher, that's kind of maybe not. That's more need based. That is one position that we have moved in and out of more frequently, as opposed to, eliminating other positions. And then the reserves we fund every year. So yeah. It's like adding positions with grant money, right? I mean, it's better to do it for one-time things that you aren't recurring because you basically obligate yourself unless you want to cut positions in the future. We have not historically been known for cutting full positions, although there's a few in here this year. And certainly not educational positions. All right. Has everyone had enough of this for tonight? You have enough to think about to come back next week, fresh and with all sorts of dreamed up great ideas? Yeah. Okay. To be continued. I have no idea where my thanks. Thank you guys.